Namaste. Welcome to another edition of Now Vimash podcast. So we are back after a hiatus. I was traveling, so could not do few shows. But from this weekend onwards, we will be back to our normal schedule. So we have two more podcasts coming up tomorrow. One is reaction video coming up tomorrow 3 p.m. And we have one more podcast coming the very interesting Japan series, Cast in Japan, Hindi podcast. We will have part two of this Sunday, tomorrow, 7:30 p.m. IST. So do join us for that. And tonight we have Dr. Bijeet Prasantha joined us for the episode 7 of the lecture series on Christianism. So, Namaste Bijitda.
Namaste.
Yeah, and as you can see that we are carrying the Shatru Bodh theme into our podcast as well. So we have the book by Mr. Pankaj Saxena, a very formidable intellectual icon, I would say, of the Hindi perspective. He wrote a book called Swayam Bodh and Shatru Bodh, okay, uh, Hindu view of self and the world. So very interesting book. People should read that book to understand because now everybody talks about we don't have Shatru Bodh, but we need both. We need Shatru Bodh as well as the Swayam. Both go together. One of them will not be able to serve our purpose. So, Bijitda, what's in today's lecture?
Right. So today's lecture is about Christian apologism uh, in the form of Enlightenment and Renaissance and all those nice words that we talk about when we discuss Western civilization and their values. Um, we need to discuss this because it is these Enlightenment and these Renaissance, right, and the pride that the Western civilization take in discussing all these topics that led to ideas like secularism, for example. Now, the issue here is when you have a Western idea created out of, let's say, Western historicity, and then when you try to apply it in the context of India or let's say Japan or any other context, right? And specifically for countries like India, which was colonized by the British, which were basically Christian missionary power, um, then it leads to deformation in the society, in the concept itself, in the society, in the nation, and in the civilizational ethos and continuity of a nation like India, right? So that's why we need to understand the these Enlightenment, Renaissance, and how they are actually entangled with with Christianism, which itself is a, as we have already discussed, is a death cult. It's a superstitious death cult. It's not a religion. It has assumed the name religion by force. But if we go by the categorization of the intellectual Cicero, the Greco-Roman Gentile intellectual Cicero, it is actually superstition that assumed the name religion by force, right? And by subversion of the very word religion. So this is what we are going to discuss today. So in the first few minutes, I am going to talk obviously about briefly about this natural morality and philosophy around natural morality, because we need to understand, because as you see, the Christianism and the movement that it has created, it has always been reactionary, in the sense that because their doctrine is itself is not natural, it is synthetic, it is subversive. So no wonder it tried to sort of deviate from the natural morality. It tried to rule the natural morality, rule over nature and the natural morality, which lead to paradoxes and sort of crisis in the society itself. And as a response, they create more rhetoric and more literature, reactionary literature, which actually drive even further away from the natural morality itself, right? So this chain of sort of reactionary subversion has been going on for 2000 years, and it has led to ideas like colonialism, slavery, um, sort of absurdism, modernism, nihilism, Marxism, and all these sort of pathetic ideas. So that's why we are going to start with natural morality, how Christianity deviates from natural morality to conceive ideas like enlightenment, let's say, as a tool of modernism, and how the modernism that is prescribed by this Christian cult itself is a very destructive sort of um, ideology that can never bring peace to a human mind and quote unquote soul in their own term, right? So that this is pretty much will be the content and the design of this current lecture.
Just one thing. So when we talk about the Enlightenment or the Western civilization, we generally associate Western civilization, uh, the the fruits of Western civilization in terms of its culture, its art, poetry. That actually belongs to the pre-Christian era, correct? Roman, Greco-Roman, and other pagan cultures in general.
Right.
So, so when generally people talk about Western civilization, they tend to associate the culture, the civilization aspect of Western civilization to the Christian morality or the Christian Reformation. But in
Mhm.
actuality, it is not. Correct? It is
Right.
a kind of appropriation of the pre-Christian era uh, traditions into the Christian fold itself. So they
Right.
are so associating Western civilization with the Christian Reformation or Christian achievement or something, which is something actually uh, not correct in,
Hmm.
in
Sure.
that perspective.
Right. So that's the point, right? All the sculpture, architecture, form of arts, and that are there in Europe. And European knows it, and they talk about it in YouTube. I mean, you can go to, because in Europe also this paganism is rising, right? So they try to find the continuity of their civilization, just like us, right? We also are trying to search where we have come from. What are our beliefs and faiths, and how are they connected to the belief and faiths of our ancestors, how they have evolved, how they have changed, and they got subverted in the colonial era, not only the British colonial era but also the Ashrafi colonial era before that. So the same way the Europeans are also trying to find their pagan roots, and even the in US, in Americans are also trying to find their pagan roots in the Europe. Okay, so that way that they are actually discussing and explaining these things, how the various art form sorry their so how their art form, their literature, poetry, obviously the even the structure of their churches, right, their puja paddhati, all these things, how they are actually, how Christianity has like matlab, borrowed it from the pagans, then digested it and then appropriated those paddhatis, right? So obviously, Christianism has very little. I mean, as a very little to offer overall. It started, with that lie, right, of a virgin birth and all these things, and then the crucifixion, because their main icon Jesus, he has no contemporary historical record at his time, right? Sorry. So there is no contemporary historical record. So everything starting from their church, and on top of that, for example, various famous churches across Europe and even in the Scandinavian countries specifically, they are. I mean, in France or Italy. In Italy, for example, the in Florence, right, the main church on which they talk with very much pride. This guy Michelangelo drew all the painting, right? The Church of Florence, Sistine Chapel, I guess. And then there was a big church as well, which so all these churches, they are actually constructed by destroying pagan temple and on the ruins of those pagan temples, right? So I was just going through this book, recently published book, From Gods to the God. This one, right? Uh, I have
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
contacted this guy, Rama Session. Also, you can also contact. He's a he's in IIT Chennai, IIT Madras, and he is a PhD student there. He has written this book. He has discussed how the main churches, various churches in Europe, and pretty much all the churches in Scandinavia. Scandinavia में तो directly I think they got the structure and they made it into church. Okay, और बोलते हैं कि कुछ पेगन के साथ पीस ट्रीटी वगैरह साइन हुआ इसलिए हमें ये जगह मिल गया. ऐसा थोड़ा ही होता है, कोई अपना वर्शिपिंग प्लेस थोड़ा ही छोड़ता है, राइट? तो इस तरह से they captured these pagan places and converted them into churches. Now, uh, okay, so these are art forms and everything that they got from the pagans, right? But they always had this war with themselves about the justification of that absurd theology, right? The cult theology. And in order to justify that, they created literature after literature, right? Just to justify the words, these crazy ideas, right? Which has led this far, right? For 2000 years, they are just creating, I mean, rational out of nothing, out of pure vacuum, out of absurdity, out of lie. It is through this constant sort of creation of literature and theological jargon and everything that they are sustaining, that their literature is sustaining. No wonder when you read many European philosophers, right, and that you find like the writings are so absurd that you cannot follow them, right? uh, and if you start reading them with patience, because people like me have enough time to go through them just to find the trick and treachery there, you can see ki okay, they are using like 300 words and let's say whatever 30 pages. After that they are writing one very provocative idea, which has very little to do with the previous lines that they have discussed in the last 30 pages, right? And I have sent you something of Rousseau, right? Rousseau is saying ki science is incompatible with society. So ideas, crazy ideas like that, right? We can show it if you have that screenshot. That
You have sent it to WhatsApp?
हाँ हाँ.
Oh,
तो
no, it has not
so
come to me yet. Just
नहीं नहीं ना, I sent it to you. Rousseau ने लिखा था. You can check it. Anyway, so so the point is कि this is what they do, right? They create just apologist literature. And the problem there is कि when you start writing these kind of apologist literature and apologist philosophies, it leads to distort natural philosophy itself. और उसका जो फिर नतीजा निकलता है, उसका नतीजा colonialism निकलता है, right? मतलब they always try something very like provocative and very heinous, and they try to justify it through literature, and it is in their blood, right? I mean, let's say when Nazism, they were having this huge racism and hatred against the Jews. They were creating Christian literature against Jews. They tried to build this image of the Aryan Jesus who was killed by Jews, and it got propagated and multiplied by the churches, right? And those very churches, they started using the Haken cross symbol. Actually, Hitler told them, ki, please don't use it because maintain secularism. But churches did not listen to that. They used the symbol and they ran their activity, even their activity in the concentration camp, for example, because then it was the Christian nuns and those people who needed to give the consent for quote unquote euthanasia, for the mercy killing, right? They call it mercy killing. So these sort of things have colonialism. Behind colonialism, they had various ideas, right? Ki idea of discovery, for example. What is there in idea of discovery कि कोई अगर क्रिश्चियन बंदा दुनिया में खोज में निकलता है, अगर voyage में निकलता है, and if he or she finds the land, then it's a discovery and it is a Christian discovery and it becomes the land of God, right? The land of Christian God. उस तरह से यूएस बन जाता है, मतलब अमेरिका बन जाता है लैंड ऑफ गॉड, इंडिया बन जाता है एडम्स वट एवर, कि एडम श्रीलंका में जन्म लिया था, ऐसे कहानी बन जाता है वहीं से। पूरा अफ्रीका उसके स्कीम में आ जाता है। सो दिस इज हाउ दे सॉर्ट ऑफ परपिट्रेट heinous crime against humanity, and they try to justify it through these apologist literature and apologist philosophies. um, and this is what Christianism is, right? Now, so this is the long answer to your small question.
Okay, so let's start the lecture, and
Sure, sir.
then we will.
श्योर। सो मैं एक जगह से चालू करता हूँ, विच इज बेसिकली कॉल्ड द किलिंग ऑफ द नेचुरल कन्वेंशंस। ओके। सो पहले क्या होता है, पहले मतलब हम लोग ऑलरेडी डिस्कस कर चुके हैं इन प्रीवियस लेक्चर्स दैट ओके, सो देयर वाज दिस ग्रेको रोमन लिटरेचर जिसको क्रिश्चियनिज्म जो है वो अडॉप्ट कर लेता है, डाइजेस्ट कर लेता है, काफी टाइम कॉपी करने की कोशिश करता है, बट क्या होता है कि उसका क्वालिटी इतना अच्छा नहीं होता है। जैसे होमर का इलियड ओडिसी का कॉपी करना, वर्जिल को कॉपी करना, फिर उनको क्या करते हैं, उनको कैनोनाइज कर देते हैं, राइट? कि डिफरेंट जो बोलते हैं कि दीज आर क्रिश्चियन आइकन्स, फिर उनका लिटरेचर ले लेते हैं या फिर उनको कैनोनाइज कर, वर्जिल को जैसे कैनोनाइज कर देते हैं, ऐसे करके उनका लिटरेचर को कब्जा कर लेते हैं, राइट? वो इंडिया में भी हो रहा है आजकल, आपको दिखेगा कि परमेश्वर, एक परमेश्वर, ये सब कोटेशन आता है वो टैक्सी और रिक्शा के पीछे, कोलकाता में आने लगा है। एंड जिसको पता नहीं उसको पता नहीं, बिकॉज हम लोग इसका चर्चा करें तो हमें दिख जाता है कि दीज आर एक्चुअली क्रिश्चियन कोट्स दैट प्रोबेबली, एंड दे आर कोटिंग फ्रॉम बाइबल, राइट? दाऊद वट एवर समथिंग, और उसको फिर ऊपर लिखा हुआ है एक ही परमेश्वर है, उनका पूजा करो टाइप। दोज आर क्रिश्चियन कोड जो इन्होंने बंगाली या अपने संस्कृत में ट्रांसलेट कर रहे हैं और उससे प्रोपेगेट करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। इट डजेंट मैटर कि उससे मतलब उसका लिटरेचर का क्वालिटी क्या है। दे जस्ट नीड टू प्रोड्यूस अ ह्यूज वॉल्यूम ऑफ लिटरेचर जस्ट टू सॉर्ट ऑफ ओवरवेल्म कॉमन पीपल, राइट? क्योंकि इनका रीच भी वही होता है, सो कॉल्ड लोअर तबके का, जो थोड़ा अनएजुकेटेड हो, राइट? थोड़ा कोट अनकोट प्रोलेटारिएट हो, उन पे, जिनका थोड़ा एजुकेशन कम है, उन पे उनका माइंड कब्जा करना होता है। सो दैट्स व्हाई दे शो देयर वॉल्यूम ऑफ वर्क, राइट? सो इससे क्या होता, क्या है कि धीरे धीरे ये जो लिटरेचर इन्होंने कब्जा किया, कब्जा करने के बाद एक्चुअली उसका जो एसेंस था, जो ग्रीको रोमन लिटरेचर के एसेंस था, उसको ढंग से क्रिश्चियनिज्म डाइजेस्ट नहीं कर पाया। दे कुड नॉट एसेंस, मतलब उसका जो एसेंस था, उसका एसेंस नेचुरल था, राइट? बिकॉज दोज वर नॉट मोटिवेटेड लिटरेचर, दोज वर द लिटरेचर जो एक्चुअली हर एक तरह का डिस्कशन से आ रहा था, राइट? एंड दोज
Spontaneous.
लिटरेचर स्पॉन्टेनियस था, डाइवर्स था, राइट? तो इन्होंने क्या किया, इनके हिसाब से जो डाइवर्सिटी ऑफ अ लिटरेचर इज एक्चुअली वीकनेस ऑफ दैट लिटरेचर इनके हिसाब से। सो व्हाट दे डिड, दे वर नॉट हैप्पी विद इट, राइट? तो इन्होंने फिर क्या किया, इन्होंने इसको थोड़ा क्या बोलते हैं, थोड़ा इस जस्ट लाइक घुमा के उसको, जो उसका जो नेचुरल एसेंस है, वहां से फिर कन्वर्ट किया इसको हिस्टोरिसिटी में। व्हाट डू आई मीन बाय दैट? सो जैसे हमारा लिटरेचर ले लो, राइट? पुराण हो गया, हमारा जो स्मृति हो गया, राइट? वेद हो गया, ये एक तरह का लिटरेचर है जहाँ पे, जैसे पुराण में स्पेसिफिकली वी हैव सम सॉर्ट ऑफ इतिहास, जो हमें पता है कि कुछ हद तक हुआ होगा, एंड along with that we have some sort of philosophy। तो इतिहास, फिलोसफी, काफी टाइम जैसे आर्कियो एस्ट्रोनॉमी, ये सब मिक्स करके एक बुक बनाया जाता है जिसको पुराण कहते हैं, और ये हम लोग पढ़ते हैं। हम उस हिसाब से फिर तिथि डिसाइड करते हैं कि कौन सी तिथि में क्या हुआ था। तो यहाँ पे प्रॉब्लम, मतलब इट्स नॉट लाइक कि हम लोग इतिहास लिख रहे हैं उससे फिलोसफी अलग होना चाहिए, हमें दिमाग में ये सब नहीं करते हैं। हम लोग अगर तीन चार शास्त्रों को एक साथ डाल के अगर कोई पुराण बना सकते हैं, इसको हम लोग अप्रिशिएट करते हैं। बट क्रिश्चियनिटी जैसे, क्रिश्चियनिज्म जैसे कल्ट जो है, वो इसको अप्रिशिएट नहीं कर पाता है। वो एक्चुअली चाहता है कि फिलोसफी और हिस्ट्री इसको थोड़ा अलग रखा जाए। ठीक है, क्यों? क्योंकि उनका फोकस प्योरली दे फोकस ऑन द हिस्ट्री, मतलब हिस्ट्रियोसेंट्रिज्म, कि व्हाट इज द हिस्ट्रियोसेंट्रिज्म, कि जब जीसस का बर्थ हुआ था, व्हिच इज 0 AD, and all the karam kand around Jesus, right, that they have written in the first few gospels. So, because of this historiocentrism, Christianism and the Christianist literature actually start to deviate from the natural convention. ठीक है. So basically, वहाँ से क्या होता है, वहाँ पे हाँ, so I was writing about it and I would like to quote a few lines from here. So obviously, you know, कि Abrahamism never needed the consent of all mankind, because they knew कि they just need to feed into the brain of a few people, create a vertical split, और समाज में दंगा लगा के they need to capture a fraction of the society, वहां से फिर दिमाग की तरह घुस के फिर अंदर से खाली कर दो कोई भी कल्चर को. So they don't need the consent of all mankind to propagate their faith. Furthermore, the cult of Abrahamism made it their perpetual ambition to replace natural right and natural moralities with historiocentrism. Whenever any opportunity arose through scientific, geographical, historical, or archaeological findings that could affirm the existence of natural rights, natural reason, and natural conditions leading to the natural evolution of morals or philosophies, the Abrahamic cults acted hand in glove to suppress those facts and findings with ardent vigor. When fossils of dinosaurs, for example, were found to be older than the mythical biblical age of the earth, because Christianism believed that the earth was created in 404 BC, 4004 BC, or when it was discovered that the earth moved around the sun and not otherwise, Abrahamism banished and punished the scientific, archaeological, or astronomical explorers very harshly, all to keep the faith of their lambs intact in the biblical truth. Now, this continuous attempt from their end to suppress this naturalness of theories, reason, knowledge, and societies emboldened them to announce the most brutal lies. ठीक है, कुछ they pronounce some big lies such as one, history teaches us that no natural rights exist. Two, rights cannot be universalized. Three, rights need reason to be revealed, which presupposes cultivation of a rational mind. Therefore, savages, uncivilized, heathen, pagan, or kafirs can never know them. So first point, what they say, ki history teaches us that no natural right exists, and second, rights cannot be universalized. Now, the reason behind peddling these two lies are obvious, because Abrahamism wish and they also require for their own sustenance to impose their own motivated idea of right, truth, and justice upon humanity. In a society that is non-Abrahamized or non-Christianized or half-Christianized, this Christianism dare not speak of universal right, because this us and them, the vertical split between believer and kafir, is essential for this theological justification of the death cult. Christianism must deal with societies in different corners of the globe and different times by one. So basically, you know that across the globe there are different societies which are diverse societies, and now Christianism need to counter them or face them one by one, right? तो इसके लिए they believe कि there should not be any natural right or there should not be any universal idea of right, because अलग सोसाइटी को अगर कॉन्कर करना है तो अलग अलग आइडियोलॉजी से कॉन्कर करना है, तो उनको ये आइडिया छोड़ ही देना है कि यूनिवर्सल और नेचुरल राइट एग्जिस्ट कर सकता है, राइट? Now, obviously, what does not change across geography is the spontaneity and vitality of life. Its spontaneous power to reason, structure formation, and potential for natural nucleation and growth. Right within a society, in individual life, and in its interaction with the environment itself, Christianism need to deny, dismiss, and decry that natural value within a being. It must impose its own framework of reason and rationality on the human psyche. Right. Now, the realization of variety of notions of right is very incentive for the quest of natural right. ये सब तो मैं बोल चुका हूँ, right? Now the point is कि यहाँ से क्या create होता है? यहाँ से पहली बात they start dismissing naturalness of right, justice, society formation, naturalness of civilization, naturalness of truth itself. ठीक है? So and because they have to deny for their own sustenance. अगर ये नहीं बोलेंगे फिर दे कैन नॉट कॉन्क्वेयर राइट डिफरेंट सोसाइटीज. तो इसलिए इन्हें ये कॉन्टिन्यूसली वो जो लाई क्रिएट करते हैं उस लाई और फॉल्सहुड को फिर एक्सपोनेंशिएट करना पड़ता है राइट. और जो थर्ड पॉइंट था कि राइट्स नीड रीजन टू बी रिवील्ड व्हिच प्रीसपोजेस कि ये बोलते हैं कि सब कुछ तो रिवीलेशन है राइट. नाउ राइट्स अगर है तो उसके लिए भी कोई स्क्रिप्चर बना होगा, उसके लिए कोई स्क्रिप्चर के थ्रू कोई रिविलेशन के थ्रू गॉड से आया होगा राइट. सो ये जो बारबर पेगन हिदन जो बंदे हैं जो काफिर हैं, इनके पास तो सोल नहीं है. अगर सोल नहीं है तो वो रीजन कैसे कर सकता है. सो उसके उनके पास तो कोई राइट्स या जस्टिस का या फिर सोसाइटी का कोई आइडिया आ ही नहीं सकता है राइट. ये जो नेचुरल रीजनिंग होता है ये सब इनके पास आ ही नहीं सकता है. So that way, what they try to do, they try to dismiss the any civilizational truth or civilizational value which grew across the world, right? कि पूरे दुनिया में अपने अपने हिसाब से civilization create हुआ with their own sense of truth, with their own sense of aesthetics and everything. वो क्रिश्चियनिज्म बिल्कुल ही सीधा सीधे तरीके से बिल्कुल डिसमिस करता है राइट. सो ये इस नाउ once this destruction of society is built on natural convention right is complete. यहाँ पे मैं और एक चीज बोलना चाहता हूँ कि जैसे नेचुरल मोरल हो गया, नेचुरल हिस्ट्री हो गया, दे आर पार्ट ऑफ सम इटर्नल फ्लो now, and this natural eternal flow does not care much about the petty human identities or the politics around identities or the history of identities. there are certain there are certainty, factuality and universality in the natural world which must seep into the natural morals and natural history as well. This can ideally be explored only through darshan, the objective, non-attached philosophical discourse by the seers, by the drashtas, right? But this certainty, factuality, and universality are missing in Abrahamism. And this omission is deliberate because the Abrahamic system, by their very construct, are non-natural. They create their own version of history, their own version of truth, and their own vortices or centricities in the flow of history. जैसे the birth of Jesus, the virgin birth, right? Natural history, by contrast, entails a certain degree of knowability, enough for natural morals or lessons to be revealed before mankind. ठीक है, जो natural history है, it actually it has a certain degree of knowability, right? But ये Christianity में नहीं होता. Christianity में क्या होता है? Natural history by contrast entails a certain degree of knowability which is missing in Abrahamism or in Christianism because they take a stand against this naturalness. They seek to obliterate the trace of natural history and natural revelation historically known to mankind by burn. क्योंकि जो natural history है ये इनके लिए खतरा है, right? So what they do, they burn books, they burn library, destroy, convert, digest monuments and temples, erase social memories, ancient customs, traditions, devtas, epics, folklores, even plantation, biodiversity, and anything that could retain the memory of natural historical revelation. आप अगर बोलोगे कि आयुर्वेदा अच्छा है क्योंकि ये नेचुरल एक तरीके से बनाया जा रहा है, तो उनके लिए आयुर्वेद अच्छा नहीं होगा बिकॉज इट इज समथिंग नेचुरल राइट. हेंस इट इज अगेंस्ट द abrahamic principle, the very sort of synthetic principle that they built around this historical vortex of Jesus's virgin birth, right? वो vortex को वो टच नहीं करता, वो नेचुरलिटी. इनफैक्ट आयुर्वेदा उससे काफी टाइम पहले से चला आ रहा है, प्रोबेबली 4004 बीसी से पहले से आता जा रहा है. एंड दैट वेरी फैक्ट इज अ थ्रेट टू द एग्जिस्टेंस ऑफ क्रिश्चियनिज्म. तो इसलिए ये सब जला देते हैं, ये जला डालना, ये नॉलेज खत्म कर देना, बायोडाइवर्सिटी खत्म कर देना, क्योंकि क्या पता प्लांट का कोई नेचुरल मेमोरी होगा, उसका कोई नेचुरल हिस्ट्री होगा. दे डोंट वांट इवन दैट. तो उसको भी खत्म करना, निष्कासित करना होता है मेमोरी से. एंड नाउ वंस द डिस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ सोसाइटी इज बिल्ट ऑन द नेचुरल कन्वेंशंस इज कंप्लीट, Abrahamism begins to focus on creating rift between nature and civilization. When यहाँ पे क्या बोल रहा हूँ कि जैसे so for example when Plato is talking about allegory of the cave, again going back to that same old example, he is envisioning. So the allegory of the cave क्या होता है कि okay, there are this humanity who are standing before the dark wall of a cave. उसके दूसरे तरफ एक डोर है, और डोर के थ्रू कुछ उसके बियॉन्ड कुछ इवेंट हो रहा है, और उसका शेडो हमने दीवार पे पड़ रहा है, वी आर जस्ट seeing that wall and the shadows therein, and we are trying to perceive about what is going on outside. Now, when Plato is giving that example, obviously he's envisioning this philosophy, envisioning a sort of transcendence, where the philosopher, out of that humanity, are those people who can actually come out of the cave and can experience the reality, experience the sun, and they can bask in the sun, and they can directly see what is actually going on there. सो यहाँ पे ये एक इस पे एक नेचुरलनेस है, इस ट्रांसेंडेंस में एक नेचुरलनेस है, राइट? बट अब्राहमिज्म के लिए ये अच्छा नहीं है, क्रिश्चियनिज्म के लिए अच्छा नहीं है, बिकॉज they have a perpetual sense of inferiority and fear, right? And it cannot tolerate that factuality of nature, right? तो इसके लिए उनके लिए फिर ये जो ट्रांसेंडेंस है, जहाँ पे यू कैन एक्चुअली गो आउट एंड चेक द रियलिटी फॉर योर सेल्फ, अब्राहमिज्म या अब्राहमिक कॉन्स्ट्रक्ट में, क्रिश्चियन कॉन्स्ट्रक्ट में इसका कोई जगह नहीं है, ठीक है? उनके लिए रिटोरिक का जगह है, उनके लिए फिलोसफी जिस लेंस में देख रहे हो वही लेंस सब कुछ है. In their world, it is everything, every literature, every moral, every society is merely a historical construct. It is not a natural construct. इससे फर्क क्या पड़ता है? इससे फर्क ये पड़ता है कि now they actually oblige you, they force you to just talk about the lens through which you are seeing the world, right? And not about the factuality. They say कि you cannot look at the world naturally, you have to look through a lens. It is not possible that you can see the world without a lens. यही हिस्टोरिसिटी है कि दे ट्राई टू फाइंड आउट कि जब बोल रहे हो कि ऋग्वेद या फिर वेदांत का जन्म हुआ नेचुरली हुआ, नो, इन देयर माइंड इट इज एन एक्सप्रेशन ऑफ ब्राह्मणिज्म, राइट? इट इज कि कोई ब्राह्मण होगा, वो अपने हिसाब से लिटरेचर लिखा होगा लोगों को, वट एवर, लोगों का माइंड कब्जा करने के लिए. सो फॉर देम इट इज द लेंस दैट मैटर्स, एंड देयर इज नो नेचुरल फिलोसफी, नो नेचुरल सीइंग कैपेबिलिटी that human being is capable of. ठीक है? So that's how
Bijitda,
the.
if,
Mhm.
yeah, one thing actually we are talking about, correct, the lens. So,
Right.
correct, this comes from their perspective because they see everything through their lens. So,
Mhm.
and they are imposing their perspective on others. Okay, if I have a lens on which I see everything, then the other person must have a lens and he sees from their perspective. So
Right.
they are unable to appreciate the spontaneous, natural morality, natural things
Factuality
which
of
we
nature,
do.
right?
Factuality is there because they cannot perceive it, the factuality part of it. They think everybody else must be same as I am,
Exactly. The organicness.
and yeah. So that's why they accuse other people of the same thing that they do it by themselves.
Right. एंड इफ यू आर सजेस्टिंग कि देयर एग्जिस्ट ए नेचुरल मोरालिटी और हमारे पूर्वज ये कर रहे थे, तो अब्राहमिज्म या क्रिश्चियनिज्म के हिसाब से तुम एक बार्बर हो, एक बर्बर हो, एक ट्राइबल हो, एक वट एवर, राइट, एक इग्नोरेंट पर्सन हो, राइट, और क्या क्या सैवेज हो, ये सब वर्ड यूज करेंगे, बिकॉज इन देयर माइंड की मतलब राइट नीड रीजन टू बी रिवील्ड. उनके हिसाब से कि भाई एक हिस्ट्रियोसेंट्रिसिटी है दुनिया का, जिसके अराउंड ट्रूथ रिवील हुआ है, और वो, सो बेसिकली इट इज द हिस्ट्री दैट रिवील्ड द ट्रूथ, इट इज नॉट नेचर दैट रिवील्ड द ट्रूथ. So for them it is the history that is the creator of convention. It is the history that is creator of convention. It is not the nature that is creator of, that can be potentially creator of convention or civilization. So this is how they kill the natural convention, right? So this is how the Christianism devotes humanity from reality. ठीक है? So obviously once the naturality and factuality are stripped from theology, philosophy, and politics, once philosophy was reduced to a thin, fragile film, it became easy for Abrahamism to declare that all human thoughts are merely historical, and human intellect can grasp nothing eternal. This degradation of knowledge allowed petty political cults to pose as eternal, while natural, organic, or evolutionary truths were deemed unreachable. So basically क्या होता है? पहले एक इटर्नल था जो नेचुरली रिवील हो रहा था. ना ये लोग क्लेम कर रहे हैं जो अब्राहमिज्म के थ्रू रिवील हो रहा है वही इटर्नल है, और बाकी जो चीज है वो टेम्पोरल है. टेम्पोरल का सिनोनिम क्या है? सेकुलर. सो वंस दे क्लेम कि जो हिस्टोरिक रिविलेशन है दैट इज इटर्नल, मतलब जस्ट इमेजिन जो एक एक्चुअली फैक्चुअली जो एक टेम्पोरल चीज है, हिस्ट्री में एक पॉइंट में अगर ट्रूथ भी हो जाए, मान लो कि ये क्रिश्चियनिज्म एक ट्रूथ है, फॉल्सहुड नहीं है, तो एक पॉइंट पे क्रिएट हुआ है ना, वो जो हिस्टोरिकल फैक्चुअलिटी वो पॉइंट पे क्रिएट हुआ है. सो इट इज दैट क्रिश्चियनिज्म हुई चीज सेक्युलर. It is not eternal. It is Christianity that is temporal because it has a birth. बट ये उसको सपोर्ट करते हैं कि क्रिश्चियनिज्म इज इटर्नल. क्यों? क्योंकि इट रिवील्स द नेचुरल राइट एंड नेचुरल वॉट एवर सेंस ऑफ जस्टिस एंड रीजन, राइट. सो क्रिश्चियनिटी इज इटर्नल, एवरीथिंग एल्स इज जो मान लीजिए पेगन हो गया, अलग अलग किस्म का नॉलेज हो गया, ठीक है, नेचुरल, ऑर्गेनिक, एवोल्यूशनरी ट्रूथ हो गया, वो सारे सेकुलर है. सो साइंस इज सेकुलर नॉट बिकॉज इट इज डिटैच्ड फ्रॉम रिलीजन. Science is secular because it has a historicity associated with it, and it is not eternal. Only Christianity is eternal. Science is not eternal. Science is temporary. Hence, it is secular. ठीक है. So this is the basis of secularism that Christianism has offered historically. एंड ये जैसे मैंने बेसिस बता दिया, इसको मैं फर्दर एक्सपेंड कर सकता हूँ क्योंकि बाद में इट स्टार्टेड विद इट हैज अ ह्यूज हिस्ट्री एक्चुअली. जब लूथर आया, लूथर से कुछ रिफॉर्म्स आए, उसके बाद कुछ ट्रीटी ऑफ पीस साइन हुआ, नेशन स्टेट बना, फिर जॉन लॉक ने कुछ इसी तरह से चीज़ों को एक्सप्लेन करने की कोशिश की, वहाँ से फिर सेकुलरिज्म का आइडिया आया, which I'm going to gradually tell you in this episode. But this is the basis. This is the philosophy of the sort of factual history that we are going to talk about, right? तो यहाँ पे मैंने एक provocative sort of polemic लिखा था, जो मैं पढ़ूंगा. बट एनीवे, सो बिफोर दैट, हाँ, so once naturality and factuality were stripped from theology, philosophy, politics, once philosophy was reduced to a thin, fragile film, it became easy for Christianism to declare all human thoughts are merely historical, secular, and human intellect can grasp nothing eternal. The degradation of knowledge allowed petty political cults to pose as eternal, while natural, organic, evolutionary truths were deemed unreachable. In doing so, they broke the spine of indomitable human spirit that once sought to explore the knowability of natural rights, and finally decreed that such inquiry, or bidat in Islamic word, right? Here, the heresy or philosophical questioning, inquisition, right? Those were forbidden, haram, and punishable. That no convergence between nature and convention can ever be established is at once the conclusion and the diktat of the Abrahamics. ठीक है, ये कंक्लूजन भी है उनके लिए और ये उनका डिक्टाट भी है. क्योंकि क्योंकि दे डोंट नीड अ थीसिस टू रीच अ कंक्लूजन. दिस इज द डिक्टाट एंड दिस इज द कंक्लूजन कि नो कन्वर्जेंस बिटवीन नेचर एंड कन्वेंशन is ever possible, right? So needless to say, this genocide of natural conventions creates countless anomalies and leaves behind abundant traces of sins committed by the Abrahamics, the Christians, for example, which these petty ideologies tirelessly attempt to whitewash in every corner of society. इससे एनोमली निकलता है क्योंकि ये अपने आप में एक फॉल्सूट है। तो ये जो सारे एनोमली है उसको तो व्हाइट वॉश करना होगा। ये जो खून निकला है, ये जो जेनोसाइड किया है, इसका जो चारों तरफ ब्लड फैला हुआ है, उसको धोना तो पड़ेगा। और चर्च का वही काम होता है, या फिर जो जो अब्राहमिक सारे जो इंस्टीट्यूशन बनाया जाता है उसका काम यही होता है कि चीजों को व्हाइट वॉश करना। राइट, सारे सोसाइटी के कॉर्नर पे जाओ, सारे बड़े बड़े इंस्टीट्यूशन कब्जा करो और चीजों को व्हाइट वॉश करो। ऑन वन हैंड द वाइल मोटिवेशन टू एस्टेब्लिश homogeneity drives them to absurd claims that the diversity of notions of rights and convention proves non-existence of natural rights and convention। जैसे बोलते हैं कि हिंदुइज्म एक धर्म ही नहीं है। क्यों नहीं है? क्योंकि हिंदुइज्म इतना डाइवर्स है, इसमें इतने सारे एक थियोलॉजी नहीं है, ये एक सच नहीं है, इसलिए इसलिए ये धर्म नहीं हो सकता। सो द डाइवर्सिटी ऑफ नोशन ऑफ राइट proves the non-existence of that notion of right as per them, as if nature and her components were all painted in the same color, right? I mean, if we go by their logic, then the nature and all the components are painted in the same color, right? As if nature and her components were all painted in the same color, as if diversity within an ism implied the absence of that ism, as if history and philosophy could not coexist and together deepen our understanding of nature, right, justice, or convention, as if philosophy should surrender the right to discuss such questions solely to history and historicism, as if the philosophical elements within a race's historical discourses reduce its entire history to mere mythology, as if rights and justice, being conventional in a society, could therefore have no basis of nature. But justice or right conventional है in a society, like in a Hindu society, it was a convention. ये हमें मिला था पूर्वजों से, which so they will say कि it has no basis in nature, as if all rights and all justice rested merely on arbitrary communal decisions and thus stood opposed to nature, as if rights and justice were mere social contracts incapable of producing or promoting truth, कि राइट्स और जस्टिस से सच का कुछ लेना देना नहीं है। जैसे उसने रूसो ने लिखा है कि जो सोसाइटी है और इसका सेंस ऑफ राइट्स और जस्टिस है, ये एक्चुअली साइंस के खिलाफ है। राइट, दिस इज व्हाट ही हैज रिटन। एंड ये मैं कोट कर रहा हूँ, ये एक्चुअली कोट किया है लियो स्ट्रॉस का नेचुरल राइट एंड हिस्ट्री इस बुक में, उन्होंने रूसो को कोट किया है। सो और ओरिजिनल जो लेटर है वो एक्चुअली फ्रेंच में लिखा हुआ है, सो दैट्स व्हाई आई एम मेंशनिंग द रेफरेंस हियर। Okay, as if rights and justice were mere social contracts incapable of producing or promoting truths, as if no human construct could possess the dignity of a natural norm simply because the Abrahamic constructs lack such dignity, as if nature and human history were two separate, unmergeable realms, only because the subversive cults of this Christianism cannot merge with nature's beautiful assimilative organicness. When Abrahamism began facing questions and doubt from intellectuals of every stratum, it launches a global scam to segregate knowledge in the name of creating specialists in various subjects. अगर सच है, सच का सच जो जिसे रित कहते हैं हम, रित का अलग अलग अगर ब्रांच अगर सत्य है, तो सारे सत्य एक्चुअली दे विल बी consistent with each other. Truths are never with, no matter which truths they can never be at contrast to each other. They can never be paradoxical to each other. No matter if they seem paradoxical, they might have a logical connection, right? It is a complete tree, right? Which is at the base, at the root, there is Rid, and then there are other branches of truths. बट इनको तो सच प्रोड्यूस नहीं करना है, तो इसलिए ये लोग अलग अलग जो नॉलेज का जो सेक्टर है उसको सेग्रीगेट कर देते हैं। सेग्रीगेट करके क्या बोलते हैं? स्पेशलाइजेशन। कि हिस्ट्री अलग सब्जेक्ट है जिसका दर्शन से कुछ लेना देना नहीं है, दर्शन एक सब्जेक्ट है जिसका शायद साइंस से कुछ लेना देना नहीं है, मैथमेटिक्स एक है जिसका बायोलॉजी से लेना देना नहीं है, राइट? और इसके लिए स्पेशलिस्ट क्रिएट करते हैं, right? So science, philosophy, history, convention, tradition, arts, and polity were split apart until they ceased to communicate and develop in isolation within compartments predefined by Abrahamism. Historicism, which emerged especially in the 19th century with high volume of literature, served only to protect the lies and myths constructed by the church. Obviously, the church is following historiocentrism around this mythical figure named Jesus since its very inception. So there is absolutely zero historical record of Jesus from his own time. So obviously these are myths constructed by church. While the natural convention of the tribals, Kafirs, heathen, pagan, and proletariats were hidden, whitewashed, and weaponized against their own societies, the native communities began to experience internal friction merely to defend the falsehood propagated by the church and the apologetic knowledge spread by the missionary assisted institution. ना ये लोग जब एक झूठ प्रोपोगेट कर देते हैं और फिर उसका वो जो एक टेम्पलेट अपने मन में क्रिएट करके उसको डिफरेंट सोसाइटी में डाल देते हैं, now it become the duty of these kafirs or the colonized people to defend those falsehood. और उन falsehood को डिफेंड करने के चक्कर में हम लोग आपस में लड़ लेते हैं कि यार ये कास्ट का है, वो उस कास्ट का है, तू पता नहीं 1000 साल पहले मेरे बाप दादा को कुछ किया होगा, राइट? कोई हमारे तरफ कोई लिटरेचर नहीं है, कोई भी स्टेट ऑफ सोसाइटी कोई लिटरेचर नहीं लिखा है कि कुछ हो रहा है, कि कुछ जेनोसाइड हुआ था या कुछ हुआ था. ऑब्वियसली एक सेग्रीगेशन एग्जिस्ट करता था, ये तो पता है हमें, बट एक दूसरे को मारने चले थे ऐसा कुछ एग्जिस्ट नहीं करता है. बट क्योंकि चर्च ये प्रोपोगेट कर रहा है, ये फॉल्सहुड प्रोपोगेट कर रहा है, तो हमें ये डिफेंड करना होगा. हमें चर्च का जो फॉल्सहुड है उसको डिफेंड करना होगा. और इसके चक्कर में हमें आपस में मतलब वट एवर पार्टी क्रिएट करके लड़ाई करो, मारपीट करो, ये सब करना होगा, right? So it is actually these caste or the colonial construct, these are actually apologetic knowledge spread by the missionary assisted institutions which we are defending, the Indians are defending at their very universities and colleges, right? So this is the sort of philosophical construct that I just told you, and this again, this is our template with which we are going to find out what actually happened in the Christian history that led to this sort of issues, right? तो अगर कोई क्वेश्चन है तो अभी ले लेते हैं, अगर कोई कमेंट
Uh,
क्वेश्चन है.
yeah, there is one question from Retro. So he's asking, is the concept of rights an Abrahamic concept, like all men are equal and others? Because we know not all men and women are born equal. We are like
Right.
the fingers of our hands together, but different.
Right. Yes. So the concept of right is a Christian concept because it has a certain sense of uniformity in it, right? उनके लिए सब कुछ एक कलर में पेंट कर देना है, सब कुछ लीनियर होना चाहिए. And the concept of right is a very linear thing. So no wonder it is ये सब उसी टाइम पे जब ये चर्च के साथ प्रोटेस्टेंट का जो झमेला हुआ, फिर वही मैं डिस्कस करूंगा, फिर अलग अलग नेशन क्रिएट किया गया, उनके सोवरेनिटी क्रिएट किया गया, वहां से ये सब राइट का कॉन्सेप्ट आता है. बेसिकली इट स्टार्टेड विद द राइट ऑफ डिफरेंट नेशंस कि हम चर्च के जो वट एवर उसका जो कमांड है, ऑर्डर है, चर्च को हम लोग सुप्रीम अथॉरिटी नहीं मानेंगे, वी शुड हैव आवर ओन सोवरेनिटी एज नेशन स्टेट. वहां से जो राइट का कॉन्सेप्ट आया वो फिर इंडिविजुअल लेवल पे उसको लाके फिर खेला गया, और वहां से काफी सारे एनोमलीज क्रिएट हुए. ठीक है. अम, हाँ, मैं एक्चुअली इसमें अगेन मैंने लिखा है, तो आई वांट टू कोट एक्चुअली फ्रॉम दिस. हाँ, आई थिंक दिस इज द कोट. राइट. सो मैंने ये लिखा था कि Socratic, Platonic, or Stoic definition of justice presumes that justice is good and it consists in giving everyone what is due to him. This is the way to define justice through rights. But the physical world is chaotic, imperfect, and ontologically imperfect. This imperfection holds the definition of justice through the lens of rights in really poor light. This can lead a man to always whine to his near ones in his society, to the world, or to the universe that grave injustice have been done on him in some respect. So जब आप दुनिया को जब rights के lens से देखने लगते हो, then you are never satisfied. बिकॉज यू नो आपके जिंदगी में कुछ ना कुछ चल ही रहा है, राइट? कुछ ना कुछ इम्परफेक्शन आपकी जिंदगी जिंदगी को अफेक्ट कर ही रहा है, राइट? तो यहाँ पे इन दिस chaotic imperfect वर्ल्ड, फिजिकल वर्ल्ड, आप अगर राइट्स के नजरिए से देखोगे तो ऑब्वियसली आप बोलोगे यार मतलब कुछ तो राइट है मेरा हैप्पी रहने का, वो मेरे से छीना जा रहा है, और कोई ना कोई तो छीन रहा है ये सब, ठीक है? सो इट लीड्स अ मैन टू वाइन दैट टू द नियर वन, टू द सोसाइटी, टू द वर्ल्ड एंड टू द यूनिवर्स, दैट उसके साथ इंजस्टिस हो रहा है। इट डजंट मेक यू कंटेंट, राइट? क्योंकि जो नेचर का फ्लक्चुएशन है उससे तुम खुद फ्लक्चुएट होने लगते हो, राइट? अगर नेचर का फ्लक्चुएशन तुम्हें अनहैप्पी चीजें ऑफर कर रहा है, देन ऑब्वियसली योर माइंड, योर सोल इज गेटिंग फ्लक्चुएटेड एज वेल. This creates a rhetorical view of one's life and one's understanding of the world, and may take him away from the fact and objective realities. तो तुम उसको इंटरप्रेट करने लगते हो कि यार ये हुआ था इसलिए मेरी जिंदगी बर्बाद हुई. सो दैट मीन्स कि उस नजरिए से जब देखने लगते हो, इट बिकम्स ए रिटोरिक. एंड शायद ऑब्जेक्टिव रियलिटी कुछ अलग है, लेकिन आप एक रिटोरिक पकड़ के, जब राइट के रिटोरिक पकड़ के चलते हो, तो ऑब्जेक्टिव रियलिटी से आप खुद को स्प्लिट कर लेते हो, खुद को अलग कर लेते हो. दिस टेक्स हिम अवे फ्रॉम हिज प्रत्यक्ष learning about the world through direct experience and through his own understanding. This is why it makes sense to define justice from the perspective of duties and not right. Every individual, every socio-political structure, every nation, or even every devta has their own set of duties. If and when someone fails to perform those duties, he does injustice to everyone else. सो अगर ड्यूटीज के फ्रेमवर्क से अगर दुनिया को देखने लगते हो, फिर वो एक्चुअली यू यू स्टार्ट टू ओन योर प्राइड एज वेल एज योर मिस्टेक्स, ठीक है? कि मेरा ये ड्यूटी था, ये मैंने किया या नहीं किया. अगर नहीं किया, so I have done injustice to pretty much the whole matrix, whole scheme of society, of nation, family, and everything. If and when someone fails to perform these duties, he does injustice to everyone else. This elevates the importance and virtue of justice from barter and trade contract to something innate, spiritual, and spontaneous duty of a man. तो जब राइट्स के नजरिए से हम देख रहे थे, तो हम बोल रहे थे यार सोसाइटी से तो मुझे ये मिलना था, मुझे मिला नहीं, तो सोसाइटी ने कॉन्ट्रैक्ट तोड़ा है. तो ये जो बार्टर एंड ट्रेड वाला कॉन्ट्रैक्चुअल बेसिस ऑफ जस्टिस जब जो राइट से निकलता है, उससे फिर ड्यूटी बेस्ड जब करते हो, फिर जस्टिस आपका एक इनेट, स्पॉन्टेनियस, स्पिरिचुअल एक सेंस बन जाता है, एक ड्यूटी, एक 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 स्कीम बन जाता है, एक मैट्रिक्स बन जाता है अंदर. In rights based justice, everyone is looking at the system and the matrix with a motivation to exploit it. Right based justice जब करते हो, then दिमाग में चल रहा है how to exploit the external situation, right? In duty based justice, everyone is looking at the matrix and its response to his deeds, all while he performs his duties with the motivation to receive honor, dignity, and claim to nobility as a proud arya. कि जब तुम यहाँ से ड्यूटी पे जब आ जाता है, ड्यूटी पे फिर क्या होता है कि मैं अगर परफॉर्म करता जाऊंगा ड्यूटी, अगर कर्म ठीक से करता जाऊंगा, आई विल रिसीव ऑनर, डिग्निटी, एंड क्लेम टू नोबिलिटी. अगर बाकी एडवर्टाइजमेंट भी नहीं हो रहा है मेरे काम का, तो भी इन माय ओन आईज आई विल बिकम आर्या, राइट? बिकॉज आई हैव परफॉर्म माय ड्यूटीज, मैंने ढंग से सारे कर्म किया है, एंड दैट्स हाउ आई हैव अचीव द डिग्निटी एटलीस्ट इन माय ओन आईज, राइट? फिर तो ड्यूटी बेस्ड जो सोसाइटी बनता है, दिस वे द कैपेसिटी ऑफ ए सिंगल पर्सन टू ब्रिंग मोरल परवर्शन ऑल्सो गेट्स मिनिमल. तो मैं अगर अपनी ड्यूटी के हिसाब से देखूंगा और राइट के हिसाब से नहीं देखूंगा, फिर मैं सोसाइटी को ज्यादा मोरली परवर्ट नहीं करूंगा, राइट? एंड ऑल्सो द पॉसिबिलिटी ऑफ स्प्लिट गेट मिनिमल, क्योंकि मुझे जो लग रहा है मैं कर रहा हूँ अपने हिसाब से, ड्यूटी ठीक से कर रहा हूँ, सो फिर अंदर वो स्प्लिट नहीं आएगा जिसके बारे में हम लोग बार बार डिस्कस करते हैं.
Got it, got it.
राइट. तो थोड़ा पानी पी लेता हूँ. और कुछ क्वेश्चन है क्या?
No, no, we don't have too many questions today.
हम्म.
People are celebrating
हमने थोड़ा
winning
लेट भी
Bihar.
चालू किया है
Yeah, yeah,
मैच.
we are late as well. Yeah, people actually celebrating the winning Bihar. So I think they can watch it later as well.
right, right, right. uh, सो फिर यहाँ से और एक चीज में जो हम लोग डिस्कस कर रहे थे, दैट वाज दैट पीस ट्रीटी इन यूरोप, द बर्थ ऑफ नेशन स्टेट। तो वो थोड़ा मैं डिस्कस कर लेता हूँ। ये एक्चुअली मैं जैसा दीपक के बुक से कर रहा हूँ, इंडिया दैट इज भारत। यहाँ पे एक्चुअली अच्छे से लिखा हुआ है एंड ही इज गिविंग वेरी गुड रेफरेंसेस। सो लेट्स डिस्कस दिस पार्ट। कोट सारे करके रखे हैं। हम्म, राइट। तो so again, I am pretty much discussing this part from JSI Deepak's book, India that is Bharat. And if you go to the chapter 4, entrenchment of coloniality through European political structure. So here JSI Deepak is actually explaining that all these sort of enlightenment, first of all, it is Christianism that actually adopted this idea of slavery, colonialism, created these ideas and further promoted these ideas in Europe, and which led all these European power to sort of go out and conquer the various part of the world and colonize them, right? Exploit their resources, call it discovery, and then create political structure and ideological structure in the name of civilizing the savages and barbarians. So ये सारे टॉपिक यहाँ पे डिस्कस हो रहा है, but in between he is discussing something very important, which is how enlightenment and all these things were born, secularism was born, how the idea of nation state was born, that actually led to, and how the whole Christian enlightenment, Renaissance, and apologist literature were born out of some crisis that Christianism was facing in Europe in 14th 15th century. ठीक है? So here he is starting the European colonial project which started with Columbus expedition in 1492. तो बोला जाता है कि Columbus quote unquote again discovered America as if it didn't exist before in 1492. So Columbus's expedition did indeed have a clear Christian inspiration that viewed nature as well as the non-Christian new world through its Cartesian dualist humanist prism. राइट कि एक क्रिश्चियनिटी है विच इज एट द सेंटर एंड आउटसाइड पूरा वर्ल्ड है, और वो सारी चीजें हमें डिस्कवर करना है क्योंकि वो तो हमारे लिए ही बना हुआ है, राइट? this this approach gave birth to the European colonizers sense of superiority over rest of the nature. हाँ, क्रिश्चियनिटी ये भी बोलता है कि क्योंकि ह्यूमन बीइंग एक्चुअली गॉड है और ह्यूमन बीइंग इज क्रिएटेड इन द इमेज ऑफ गॉड, तो ये बेसिकली जो आसपास का नेचर है, जो इन्वायरमेंट है, वो एक्चुअली भोगने के लिए है। वो जो संपद क्रिएट किया गया है वो एक्चुअली उसको उसको बेसिकली उस पर कब्जा जमाने के लिए ये सब क्रिएट किया गया है, including okay, so this gave birth to European colonizers sense of superiority over the rest of the nature, including non-Christian idolatrous and nature worshipping indigenous people, led to reshaping of nature to suit the material goals of the European colonizer, thereby giving rise to modern notion of development, and his sense of anthropological superiority created a race consciousness that spawned the global imperial exercise to civilize the soulless heathen natives by replacing the entirety of their nature with Europeans. Long sentences, just like JSI Deepak style, right? आ, तो हाँ, सो बेसिकली वही कि ये दुनिया को इस तरह से क्रिएट किया गया है ताकि यूरोपियन जो कॉलोनाइजर है वो इसको एंजॉय कर सके, and because they are superior, they are anthropologically superior, and because they are the best race, right, that is able to spawn a global imperial exercise, and they need that exercise, why? To civilize the soulless heathen natives by replacing the entirety of their culture with European culture. ठीक है? So naturally, the politics, religious or legal or educational infrastructure set up by the colonizer was geared toward the meeting the end goal of the global project, of of modernization, aka Christianization, right? However, this extent of investment and settlement in indigenous land by the European depended on the opportunity they represented and their hospitality, both physical and social. So, for instance, after setting up the administrative and legal apparatus which ensured that reins of the colonized society were firmly in the hand of colonizer, educational institutions were established primarily in those colonies, whereas the where the colonizer settled. तो दो तरह का चीजें हो रहा था. एक जगह हो रहा था कि कॉलोनाइजर जहाँ पे सेटल कर पा रहे थे, लाइक इंडिया, अफ्रीका, क्योंकि यहाँ पे उस टाइम पे देयर वाज अ ऑब्वियसली कोट अनकोट पेगन सोसाइटी, इंक्लूसिव सोसाइटी. तो यहाँ पे सेटल करना, और पीपल आर लिविंग फॉर ए वेरी लॉन्ग टाइम, तो ये पूरा जगह थोड़ा बहुत ठीक ठाक था. तो इसलिए यहाँ पे जहाँ पे ये लोग सेटल कर पा रहे थे, वहाँ पे अपना इंस्टीट्यूशन क्रिएट कर रहे थे, राइट? कॉलोनाइजिंग इंस्टीट्यूशन, एजुकेशनल इंस्टीट्यूशन. In contrast, जहाँ पे in those land which were not conducive for settlement but were rich in resources, institutions that facilitated the process of rent seeking and expropriation of resources through purchased or coerced aid of local rulers were set up. जहाँ पे ये लोग सेटल नहीं कर पा रहे थे, वहां पे फिर जो लोकल रूलर था उसको खरीदना चालू कर रहे थे ये लोग. ठीक है. वो जैसे इंडिया में ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी आया, फिर काफी सारे रूलर को खरीदे भी थे. फिर बाद में जब पर्शिया के साथ जो कॉन्फ्लिक्ट होता है ब्रिटेन का, दे वे ट्राइंग टू परचेज द शाह ऑफ ईरान, राइट? वहां से फिर एक अलग तरीके का फिर जंग छिड़ गया. सो इस तरह से जहाँ सेटल नहीं कर पा रहे थे वहाँ खरीद रहे थे, रिसोर्सेज को एक्सप्लॉइट कर रहे थे. वहाँ पे लोकल रूलर को खरीदे, जहाँ पे सेटल कर पा रहे थे वहाँ अपना इंस्टीट्यूशन बना रहे थे. फिर इंस्टीट्यूशन बनाने के बाद दे स्टार्टेड टू रूल द सोसाइटी, राइट? जैसे ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी बोलते हैं ना कि বণিকের मानदंड पेरोले সর্বরি দেখা दिलो राजदंड रूपे, कि जो यहाँ बिजनेस करने आए थे वही रूलर बन गए. And in the native society, they created this martial race theory, जहाँ से they started to segregate the Muslims and the Sikhs. They started to create their regiment because they were whatever martial race in order to rule over rest of the natives, which was developed into a full-fledged doctrine and also applied in India, right? And then the British Indian Army was organized on religious caste lines, again pointing to the colonizers' racial approach, not just to religion but also to caste. The after effect of such an approach to indigenous social structure are being felt even today, in our understanding of the idea of caste and the way it has been portrayed in Indian studies within Bharat and the rest of the world. So we know all this. Apart from the army, the policy of recruitment was extended to civil services, जहाँ से फिर bureaucracy form होता है. और इंडिया का, as we know, the Indian bureaucracy is somehow against the Indian interest. मतलब एक bureaucracy अगर कोई रास्ता बनाता है वो घटिया बनता है, bureaucracy अगर कोई monument बनाता है घटिया बनता है, bureaucracy अगर मान लीजिए कोई डिफेंस का कॉन्ट्रैक्ट लेता है कि स्वदेशी कुछ एयरक्राफ्ट बनाएंगे, वो कभी बन नहीं पाता है. रादर जो साइंटिस्ट उसमें काम करते हैं वो मरने लगते हैं. सो वी नो इंडियन ब्यूरोक्रेसी इज समहाउ करप्ट, सोल्ड आउट एंड अगेंस्ट द नेशन ऑफ इंडिया, राइट? तो सिविल सर्विस से जो ये क्रिएट करते हैं, ब्यूरोक्रेसी क्रिएट करते हैं अगेंस्ट द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ द नेटिव्स. ऑब्वियसली जुडिशियरी क्रिएट करते हैं अपने हिसाब से, कॉल द colonizing judiciary. No wonder our judiciary is against our interest, because it is a inherently a colonizing judiciary. That's why it is against the native people of India. The Indian judiciary hate the people of India, right? They have this sense of superiority. उनको मिलॉट बोलना पड़ता है, पता नहीं वो विग पहन के बैठ जाते हैं, राइट? गर्मी में काला रोब वो पहनते हैं. सो दीज आर नॉट इंडियन थिंग्स, एंड इनफैक्ट इन देयर वर्ड्स, लाइक पूरे दुनिया का सारा मैड्रास चेन्नई हो गया, बॉम्बे मुंबई हो गया, बट आईआईटी का नाम आईआईटी बॉम्बे और आईआईटी मैड्रास है. कोर्ट का नाम बॉम्बे बॉम्बे हाई कोर्ट और मैड्रास हाई कोर्ट है. ठीक है, इलाहाबाद प्रयागराज हो गया, बट इलाहाबाद का हाई कोर्ट का, इलाहाबाद कोर्ट का नाम प्रयागराज कोर्ट का नाम भी इलाहाबाद कोर्ट है, राइट? इलाहाबाद हाई कोर्ट है. सो इट एक्चुअली सेज कि हाउ द जुडिशियरी what is their view on Indian native people, right? How they look at India, and how they look down upon the Indians. ठीक है? So the political structure established by the Christian European colonizer in the colonies not only furthered the goal of economic exploitation but also served to consciously keep the native society in a constantly fragmented state while consolidating European political and territorial hold over it. ठीक है, ये इसलिए बनाया गया था क्योंकि एक स्ट्रक्चर भी बना रहे हैं तो लोगों को ऐसे लगे कि यार हमें तो कुछ जस्टिस मिल रहा है, वॉट एवर कुछ मिल रहा है, बट एक्चुअली घंटा मिले, राइट? जस्टिस के नाम पे या फिर कोई भी चीज के पॉलिटिकल इंटरेस्ट के नाम पे. So obviously, it was, those were constructed so that for a long time the native voices would not unite to oppose the colonizers' presence. Right now, it need to be appreciated that by the mid 19th century, thanks to the continued global presence of the colonizer for over a century, the Christian European vision for civilizing the rest of the world had been significantly secularized and universalized, consciously or otherwise. यहाँ पे फिर धीरे धीरे he started to discuss, J. Sai Deepak started to discuss the secularization, right? कि ये जो colonization के through the British and the French and every European colonizing power, they imposed and they continued this Christian structure across various countries. फिर वो क्रिश्चियन स्ट्रक्चर ही जैसे एक यूनिवर्सल सेकुलराइज स्ट्रक्चर बन गया, राइट? और ये हमें पता भी नहीं चला कि हमें लग रहा है कि जो ये जो इंस्टीट्यूशंस है ये तो कोई जीसस या फिर इसका पूजा वूजा या फिर वर्शिप तो नहीं कर रहा है. ठीक है, सालों में एक दिन ये क्रिसमस मना लेते हैं और समर में 3 मास 3 महीने वेकेशन में चले जाते हैं, बट प्रोबेबली दे आर नॉट क्रिश्चियन, राइट? ये दिमाग में लगता है कि दिस इज कोट एंड कोट सेकुलर स्ट्रक्चर, right? And again, secular actually mean temporary structure, right? But in our mind,
Uh,
secular structure mean यहाँ पे हाँ कि there is a distinction between the religion and the state.
Abhijit,
Hmm?
so on this account, I think this is a prompt time to actually show you something. Let me just show it up. Because I had showed you this book. You're talking about uh,
हाँ,
our constitution is Abrahamic in nature.
ये
So
आ गया क्या?
there is a
ये प्री
book.
ऑर्डर करना है, हाँ.
No, no, it's a. I need to pre-order it. So people who are watching this, right? So when Sai Deepak talks about the Abrahamic nature of Indian Constitution, Indian laws. So there is a book which is going to be coming out very soon. Okay. The book's name itself is Discovery and Bharat, Christian Constitution in an Hindu Nation. So as Vijay was talking about discovery, Columbus discovering America. So this concept comes from Abrahamic thought process that I need to civilize something. I need to find out something. Nothing exists except me right now. When I going to see something and I need to name it, then it becomes a reality.
Right,
So everything is contained within me. Okay. Everything has to be go through my validation. Nothing can exist on its own. America cannot exist on its own. Columbus has to go and discover and name it. Only then it's America. So that is how in the Abrahamic philosophy or in the Abrahamic thought process, the otherization becomes. You
right,
are other until you believe in what I am going to say to you, or you have to do what I am going to say, or else
right.
you are a savage, you are a civil uncivilized person. So, like this is a very important book. He's a lawyer in South India, most probably in Chennai, most probably he's there. So he has written a book, Discovery and Bharat, the Christian Constitution in an Hindu
I
Nation.
am very glad
So
now.
we,
In this year, near the end of this year, we see a lot of good books are coming. In the initial part of this year, we did not see, मतलब very a small number of books came in the initial part, small number of good books. अभी near the end तो काफी सारे books आ रहे हैं. So this is a very
and
happy thing for us.
yes, and also correct. We have this book coming up. I think it's an old book, but it's also good.
नहीं, वो तो आ
Swayam
गया है,
Bodhan
वो तो है हमारे
Shatrughat.
पास, राइट? ये आ गया.
No, no, you have it. Even actually, I got it signed it from the author himself at JD.
Right.
No, okay, okay, that copy. Actually, I have two copies of it. One copy is the signed copy, and one copy is I had ordered previously. So two copies of the book I have. So this also talks about correct. So when we are talking about this Swayambhudan Shatrughoth, so Hindus are Hindus can say okay, Jesus is part of the Hindu pantheon of gods. Correct? It can come and we will worship, but the other side doesn't believe in that thing. So that is, I think, there is a asymmetry, like where the Shatrughoth is very important. Swayambhuv is fine. Correct? You can accept any other the way we have actually incorporated a lot of native, a lot of nature gods into the Hindu pantheon itself, Hindu pantheon. On the other side doesn't realize that part. So in that context, the Shatrughoth is very important, which we have been missing for a long time. Apart from few blips in our history, the Shatrughoth, which is missing, and that's why we see a lot of things went wrong for us as a civilization for over 1,000 years, or maybe more than that.
Right.
So yes, uh, so this Abrahamic thought process of creating Shatru, the otherization which takes place, that Shatru that kind of Shatru we don't need, but we certainly need a clearly defined Shatru that how do you define ourselves as Hindus, as Sanatanis, and how do you define people who are not willing to accept your plural thought process, your worldview. So that's why the book here, if you see the book, light would be there. Hindu view of self and the world. So this is very important to understand when we are talking about Christianism. Christianism talks about Christian view of the world. Okay, and who is the Christian and who is not a Christian, and how they see the non-Christian world. But unfortunately for us, for Hindus, we know who we are, but our perspective has not evolved with time, with our Shatrus. So that we have to really take a look at.
Right.
So Birda, you continue. I will be back in 2 minutes to get some water.
Sure. Sure. Right. So basically, what happened? Ki the Christian European colonizer, they started to. I like baking cakes though. I hope that's Roman and not a Christian construct. I don't know about that. But yeah, this is a good line actually. Let's take it to Twitter. Uh, okay, so by the mid 19th century, the imposition of the Christian colonial construct on pretty much all the native civilizations, it is so complete that we thought it. We started the natives started to think it as secularized and universalized construct. Now the administrative legal ecosystems were accepted as the universal norm by the native elites. Critically, European ideas and institutions were deemed to be equally valid for a decolonized future that was independent of the colonizer. So when the discussion and the scheme started to roll out among the natives about how would a decolonized nation look like, right? For example, how would Swaraj look like in India? Um, Automatically in the from because in the very subconscious this imposition of Christian construct was there. So even the natives started to imagine a decolonized future, um, as I mean, with the Christian structure that they knew about, right? So in spite of thinking ki are they were taking independence and they were being independent of the European colonizer, they did not have it in mind ki the construct and the scheme that were being offered by the European colonizers, that are so inherent that they need to eliminate those schemes when thinking of a independent decolonized future. Okay, so an independent nation state modeled on European lines was the decolonized future towards which the native aspirations were generally oriented. As I said, it is in this context that it becomes imperative to understand some of the key ideas and their entirely unsecular origins that informed the colonial political structure, right? One might ask, so what if the political edifice of the European colonizer was informed by a non secular and patently religious framework? If ultimately it has been secularized, why obsess over the colonizer's religion? Right now you may say कि okay, जो ब्रिटिश कॉन्स्ट्रक्ट है वो एक्चुअली क्रिश्चियनिज्म से आया है. So what? They have actually got religion out of the structure. They have secularized the structure, and that's how they are offering it to us. So why we are obsessing about the religion of the colonizer and not sort of focusing on the very structure itself and how it is working right now, right? Now, in this regard, we have to say कि we deserve to know the origin of that structure itself, right? What thought actually engenders it? What was the history of Europeanism? What was the history of Christianism in Europe that actually led to that sort of quote unquote secular structure? What does even secularism mean? Right? It needs to be underscored that the secularization of the Christian onto episteme is the consequence of obscuring the source to a certain thought and focusing exclusively on the outward expression. कि ठीक है, we know that the outward expression of that whatever dark or bright history of enlightened quote unquote enlightenment is has offered humanity with this brilliant structure, um, but we deserve to know as the colonized people ki what history actually led to that, right? What history created the very word secularization or all these things, right? Now this outward expression must be examined for its undergirding, because those who do not subscribe to that, which is the fount of that particular thought, have the right to know of its origin and reject its imposition. In other words, the society has the right to prior informed consent बिफोर द इम्पोजिशन ऑफ एन एलियन प्रिंसिपल. कि बाहर से कोई कॉलोनाइजर आया, वो हमारे ऊपर एक एलियन प्रिंसिपल क्रिएट करके इम्पोज करके चला गया. We have the right to uh, we have the right. They should take the consent. They should have taken the consent of us before this imposition. To pixelate and deny the origins of a thought is plain deception. This argument acquires greater validity and legitimacy in the context of imposition of the colonizer's politico-economic worldview on the dominated societies, where the power balance was obviously skewed in favor of the colonizer and remained so for centuries, right? It was a structure which was created by the colonizer, for the colonizer, by the colonizer, of the colonizer, right? So if that was a structure with which they sort of plundered India, they exploited India, they started to bring inferiority complex among the Indians, then we have to, then we have to know about this whole sort of thought, the history and everything about that principle that they imposed on us, right? Otherwise, it is a plain deception and nothing else. Now, there is a general consensus among most scholars that the concept of a nation state, for example, ठीक है. So now we are going to gradually discuss this idea of nation state, and then we are going to take it to secularism again. So the concept of a nation state, for example, as has been understood since the 19th or early 20th century, may be traced to the Peace of Westphalia. The Peace of Westphalia entered into on 24th of October 1648, which ended the 30 years war in Europe after 5 years of negotiations. सो पीस ऑफ वेस्टफेलिया में क्या हुआ था? उससे पहले क्या था कि ये जो यूरोपियन नेशंस थे, उसमें एक उसको it was centered around the Pope. Okay, the Pope had all the power, और उससे थोड़ा थोड़ा पावर वहां पे लोकल फ्यूडल्स को, ठीक है, कोई लोकल रूलर को मिल जाता था. बट सबके ऊपर जो बैठा हुआ होता था वो एक सॉर्ट ऑफ एक रोम कोट अनकोट रोमन एम्पायर था, ठीक है. ना वहां से जब क्रिश्चियन रिफॉर्मेशन कोट अनकोट रिफॉर्मेशन या फिर प्रोटेस्टेंट मूवमेंट ये सब चालू हुआ, देन ये जो छोटे छोटे स्टेट थे, दे स्टार्टेड टू कम आउट ऑफ द ग्रिप ऑफ दिस कैथोलिक चर्च, सो टू से। वो अपना अपना क्या बताया, अपना अपना हिस्सा क्लेम करने लगे। और उस हिस्से में क्या क्या था? उस हिस्से में था, चार चीजें थी। एक था अपना, आई थिंक आई नोटेड दिस। सो एक था सोवरेनिटी, राइट, कि एक्चुअली इफ आई एम रनिंग ए किंगडम, आई शुड हैव द सुप्रीम पावर टू रूल ओवर इट। दूसरा पॉइंट था नॉन इंटरफेरेंस, कि बाहर से कोई स्टेट एक्टर आके, कि दूसरा नेशन स्टेट या कोई भी दूसरा कोई स्टेट आके, या फिर बाहर से कोई रैंडम क्रिश्चियन मॉन्क या पोप आके मेरे सोवरेनिटी को, मेरा जो होम मिनिस्ट्री है, वो होम अफेयर्स है, उस पे इंटरफेयर नहीं करेगा। तीसरा पॉइंट टेरिटोरियल बाउंड्रीज, कि मेरा एक टेरिटोरियल बाउंड्री मुझे डिफाइन करके दे दो, वो इंटैक्ट रहेगा, वो कॉन्ट्रैक्चुअल रहेगा। एंड इक्वलिटी ऑफ स्टेट्स, कि कोई अगर बड़ा स्टेट है, कोई छोटा स्टेट है, दे विल हैव द दे विल गेट द इक्वल ट्रीटमेंट। ठीक है। सो ये जो फोर, सोवरेनिटी, नॉन इंटरफेरेंस, टेरिटोरियल बाउंड्री एंड इक्वालिटी ऑफ स्टेट, इससे फिर जो कॉन्ग्लोमरेट क्रिएट हुआ यूरोप में, उसे नेशन कहा जाता है। ऑब्वियसली इन देयर माइंड दे क्रिएटेड नेशन आउट ऑफ द रेशियल कॉन्ग्रुगेट, which mean कि वो सोचते थे कि German as a race is different than the French. Although all of them were Christians, right? But the Christianism was not good enough apparently to hold them together to form a single state. Just imagine the nature of tolerance and acceptance of Christianism, right? That it could not यूनाइट यूरोप, और यूरोप इसलिए टूट गया, राइट। और बाद में तो बहुत बड़े बड़े जंग होता है इन द नेम ऑफ, आई मीन pretty much in the name of religion, right? Because different nations then started to sort of propagate different sort of Christian culture, and जैसे वही बीच में नाजिज्म हो गया, उसका कल्चर थोड़ा ऑब्वियसली अलग हो गया। बाद में जब इटली का यूनिफिकेशन हुआ, वो एक काफी ब्लडी टाइम था। फिर हाँ, फिर बिस्मार्क आता है, उसका अलग सा डॉक्ट्रिन आता है। बिस्मार्क होता है, फिर अपना काफी मतलब काफी सारे एम्परर आता है, who actually created their own sort of theological and historiocentric construct in order to give justification to their imperialistic nature. Okay, तो मेटरनिक आता है, जैसे उसका अलग सा एक डॉक्ट्रिन था, राइट। तो इट्स बेसिकली, हाँ, बेसिकली नेशन स्टेट वहाँ ये चार आइडिया से क्रिएट हुआ। और फिर ये जो नेशन स्टेट का आइडिया था, दे स्टार्टेड टू इम्पोज इट ऑन कंट्री लाइक, ऑन सिविलाइजेशन लाइक इंडिया। और वहां से फिर खड़ा हुए हो गया टू नेशन थियरी वगैरह, फॉर एग्जांपल, जैसे खड़ा हुआ, राइट। हाँ, तो so basically we are talking about the peace of Westphalia, entered on 24th of October 1648, which ended the 30 years war in Europe. But what was the 30 years war all about? What led to it? Was it a secular war, or did it have a distinctly predominantly religious hue? If yes, which religion? How did the peace of Westphalia lead or contribute to colonialism or coloniality? Now, prior to the advent of the Westphalian state, the Christian Commonwealth of Christian Republic, or simply the Christendom, it existed in Europe, wherein power was redistributed between the Pope, the bishops, the Holy Roman Emperor, princes of states, and nobles who thought of themselves as being part of the Christian civilization. Right now, pertinently, while there were states and rulers, they operated under the umbrella of the Pope and the Emperor. Now, starting from at least 1570 AD, that is over 100 years before the Peace of Westphalia, resistance to Catholic Church led by pastor theologian Martin Luther from Germany and John Calvin from France, known as the Protestant Reformation, had begun, owing to the abuse of the authority of the Pope and the absolute control of the Catholic priesthood over Christianity. The nature of the challenge posed by this Pope's authority needs to be understood at a deeper level in order to appreciate the true impact of Protestant sort of construct on the Peace of Westphalia and the Westphalian nation state system with its attendant trapping that were later imposed upon colonial societies, right? कि पोप का एक टाइम पे अथॉरिटी था, फिर बाद में जब वो अथॉरिटी टूटा, फिर वहां से जो नेशन स्टेट क्रिएट हुआ, यहाँ से फिर ये जो नेशन स्टेट का कॉन्स्ट्रक्ट था, दे स्टार्टेड टू इम्पोज इट ऑन सिविलाइजेशन लाइक इंडिया. ठीक है. नाउ हाँ, सो यहाँ से फिर रिफॉर्मेशन एंड एनलाइटनमेंट आता है, right? So there was this guy, I think, whose name is Jacob de Rouver. Okay, Jacob de Rouver का एक book है, Europe, India, and the Limits of Secularism. Okay, and obviously it is again a very important book in order to understand what was going on at that time, and how deceptive was this whole Christianism. That in order to survive, just for its own survival, it created so many demons. Um, so many Frankensteins, and that led to 300, 400 years of different kind of religious and civilizational wars, that those wars are still sort of going on, right? क्योंकि नेशन स्टेट का आइडिया फिर इसराइल में इम्पोज हुआ, जैसे इंडिया पाकिस्तान में इम्पोज हुआ, फिर मिडिल ईस्ट में इम्पोज हुआ, फिर वहां से फिर एक तरह का फ्रैक्चर क्रिएट हो गया पूरी दुनिया में. Now, this guy D. Rover sheds light on the Protestant politico-theological framework behind the distinction that the modern nation states make between the spiritual and the temporal or the secular. Right? According to him, the distinction significantly informed the Protestant Reformation, which started in the 16th century. His view is that liberal model of religious toleration and secularism, which continues to have purchase in the West and in decolonized states, is based on specific theological framework that was conceptually conceived of during the Protestant Reformation. He calls it the crystallization of political theology of Christian freedom and the two kingdoms. His insight on the subject and the nexus that he unearths between the political theology arising from the Protestant Reformation and the very definition of what it means to be Christian are profound and extremely relevant for decolonized societies that have inherited the European political structure. His work is an essential reading, in my opinion, especially for indigenous societies, for them to become aware of the patently non secular context of the modern distinction between the spiritual and secular institution, because it calls out the claim of neutral application of values, such as secularism, which have been inherited from the colonizer, right? कि सेकुलरिज्म का जो जड़ है वो एक्चुअली नॉन सेकुलर है. Now, why? Because, so for example, the यहाँ पे डी रूवर एक बात करता है कि to appreciate the true nature of secularization of Christianity achieved by and through the Protestant Reformation, one must understand the specific context of the word Reformation, right? Now the process of, so यहाँ से फिर I need to say something about. Okay, so today, while conversion in the context of Christianity is synonymous with proselytization of non-Christian in order to bring them into Christian fold, the very first principle which underwent conversion was Christians themselves. The process of conversion, however, refers to a structured spiritual regimen that was evolved in the medieval age by Christian monks in monasteries to achieve a true Christian life of absolute submission to God. Submission to the Creator means obedience and sacrificing individual purpose at the altar of divine purpose. The specific goal of the process was to reform man in the image of God, for which he must overcome the original sin. Right? हमें पता है कि it means complete submission to God without any question, to overcome the natural original sin. And in practice, the process of conversion. So this is the process of conversion, right? कि a man will prepare himself to become the true Christian by complete devotion to God without questioning and by overcoming the original sin. So this is conversion of the Christians themselves to become the true Christian, to sort of what do you call it, to accentuate, to expedite the द क्या बोलते हैं सेकेंड कमिंग ऑफ जीसस, कि जितना ज्यादा।
Uh, yeah, Bijit,
हम्म
the one question which comes to me my mind as well. So the early Christian tribes, okay, we can call them tribes because in the region which was the Abrahamic thought process was born, they were primarily tribal people. Uh,
हम्म
this term called proselytization, like spreading the word. Okay. So was this kind of an original idea in the tribes themselves? Because the tribes would never actually like intermingle with each other. Tribal in nature, correct? So you had the ancient Christian churches in Syria, especially in Syria and that region, and like we don't see they actually doing the persuasion, like they are going out of their way to actually convert people to their faith. So they are like a kind of a like Christian tribal faith was there in original form, and then it mutated into a kind of a Anglican churches which we see now.
yeah, right. When it was adopted by Constantine the Great,
Hmm,
then
hmm.
it started to be imposed upon the pretty much across the रोमन एम्पायर, राइट. फिर बाद में काफी सारे जंग हुए. लेटेस्ट एक जंग हुआ था पेगन्स के साथ, आई थिंक सैक्सन कम्युनिटी का कोई पेगन कम्युनिटी ट्राइब था, उनके साथ द लेटेस्ट फाइट. आई थिंक अभी भी होता रहता है, बट लेटेस्ट बिग फाइट जहाँ पे पेगन स्ट्रक्चर डिस्ट्रॉय कर दिया गया था, इट वाज इन 1870s. ठीक है, तब तक यूरोप में पेगनिज्म, क्योंकि यूरोप का जो क्रिश्चियनिटी है, जिसे हम क्रिश्चियनिटी के हिसाब से देखते हैं, यूरोपियन को पता है दोज आर एक्चुअली पेगन ट्रेडिशंस, राइट. सो पेगनिज्म को क्या,
uh,
पेगनिज्म को दबाया गया है, पेगनिज्म को दबा के रखा गया है. और वो गांव में काफी सारा अभी पेगन उभर के बाहर आ रहे हैं. दे स्टिल गो टू देयर ओल्ड प्लेसेस, दे हैव स्टार्टेड टू गो टू ओल्ड प्लेसेस जहाँ पे कुछ रूइन पड़ा हुआ है. दे नो कि जैसे हम लोगों को पता है कि इंडिया में कौन सा मंदिर तोड़ के मस्जिद बनाया गया था, द यूरोपियन नो कि कहाँ पे उनका कौन सा स्ट्रक्चर तोड़ के क्रिश्चियन स्ट्रक्चर बनाया गया था. दे नो अबाउट, एंड नाउ दे हैव स्टार्टेड टू टॉक अबाउट इट एज वेल.
yeah, because correct, because the early Abrahamic faiths were not correct as proselytizing as we see them today. So there has been a transformation, a mutation which has taken place.
राइट, राइट.
And
क्योंकि आई थिंक 1900 1930s 40s में सुभाष बोस इज सेइंग apparently कि लेट्स गो टू अफ्रीका एंड मेक देम हिंदू. सिटीज एज लेट एज 1930 1940 की सारे क्रिश्चियन अगर जा सकते हैं, सारे इस्लामिक लोग जा सकते हैं अगर, तो हम लोग जाके क्यों नहीं प्रोजेलिटाइज कर सकते हैं. But at that time, we had Indian National Congress, right? The greatest, biggest anti-national structure. जिन्होंने ये सब में ध्यान नहीं दिया, ऑब्वियसली नहीं दिया, क्योंकि इससे फंडिंग नहीं मिलता था, राइट. इससे ब्रिटिश लोगों को का पैर ढंग से चाट नहीं सकते थे ये सब आइडिया देके, तो इसलिए ये हुआ नहीं है. बट हाँ, मतलब जैसे अफ्रीका तो बहुत लेटेस्ट, मतलब बहुत ही लेट इनका कन्वर्शन हुआ है, राइट. उसके बाद इवन ऑन टॉप ऑफ क्रिश्चियन कन्वर्शन फिर इस्लाम जाके जबरदस्ती कन्वर्शन किया जाए. फॉर एग्जांपल अभी जैसे बंगाली एक सिंगर है, राइट, नचिकेता. नचिकेता का एक गाना है कि राजश्री नाम का एक गाना है, राइट, इफ यू रिमेम्बर, राजश्री তোমার জন্য মুদ্রাস্ফীতি অস্ট্রেলিয়ায়, কি রাজশ্রী তোমার
yeah,
জন্য দুর্ঘটনা সোমালিয়ায়, রাইট. সো দেয়ার ইজ দিস গ্রেট um uh whatever, like a communist singer who is singing such humanitarian song about Somalia, right. एंड अभी भी कोलकाता में भी वो सब बहुत दिन तक निकलते थे सोमालिया के लिए. What is Somalia's issue? What is Somalia's civil war? It is a religious civil war, no? Between Christians and I won't again we are calling it religion. Those are not religion. It is a cultish civil war between Islam and Christianism. जो बार बार जो बोला ही नहीं जाता है, सोमालिया में ये हो रहा है, सोमालिया का गृह युद्ध हो रहा है. क्यों, किन किन के बीच गृह युद्ध हो रहा है, कौन किसको मार रहा है. वो ना क्रिश्चियन वाले बताते हैं ना इस्लाम वाले बताते हैं, राइट. So this is the reality of these gods. Anyway, so obviously, so the process of conversion, it divided both human being and the world into two realms. One is eternal and the other is secular or temporal. So this meant that the process of conversion towards the object of reformation was a never-ending process because of two reasons. First, the original sin was too seductive to overcome, and therefore human beings would surely fall into it all the time. Secondly, this process had to continue until the second coming of Jesus. Now, the silver lining, if any, of this never ending process of conversion was that the degree of conversion achieved in this world would determine the extent of freedom conferred to the next world. ठीक है, ये सब तो चलता रहता है. Now, the next phase is the division of the spiritual realm between the monks and the priests of the church, since monastic orders had not fully merged with the church. तो क्रिश्चियन मोनास्टिक ऑर्डर एग्जिस्ट करते थे, जैसे हम लोगों ने डिस्कस किए थे, राइट. केव वेव में काफी क्रिश्चियन चले गए थे and
Hmm.
all, and they did not merge with the church. However, the influence of the monastic orders on the church led to morphing of priesthood to mirror the rigors of a monastic life, which involved the four-stage process of vocation, reform, conversion, and purification. Since monks and their way of life were exemplified as truly Christian by the church, a hierarchy of sorts was created among the subjects of God, with monks occupying the top position, followed by clergy, the earthly secular rulers, and finally the laity or the lay believers. So पहले वो आएंगे, राइट, फिर अपना सेकुलर जो रूलर है वो आएंगे, और फिर जो बिलीवर्स है वो आएंगे, जो कॉमन बिलीवर्स है, राइट, जो पसमानदा बिलीवर्स. Their order was a function of submission to God. The greater and more complete the submission, the greater the freedom from earthly authority. um, तो जितना सबमिट करोगे उतना जो अर्थली जो रूलर है, जो सेकुलर रूलर है, उनसे तुम्हें मुक्ति मिलेगा. एंड क्योंकि जितना ये सबमिशन करोगे उतना तुम ऊपर जाओगे, राइट, पोप बनोगे एक दिन. और उतना जब ऊपर जाता चला जाता है, तो फिर जो सेकुलर जो शासक है, जो एडमिनिस्ट्रेटर है, उनसे तुम्हें मुक्ति मिलता है, बिकॉज यू आर इटर्नल स्ट्रक्चर. एंड जो नीचे जो प्रशासक है, जो रूलर है, दोज आर सेकुलर स्ट्रक्चर, राइट. अ किंग इज अ सेकुलर स्ट्रक्चर. वो आएगा जाएगा, बट चर्च रह जाएगा. सो जितना ऊपर जाओगे उतना तुम्हें अर्थली जो रूलर है, सेकुलर रूलर है, उनसे मुक्ति मिलती जाएगी. Okay, so the order was a function of submission to God and blah blah. Critically, there was an allocation of wards between the monks and the clergy. The monks would lead the rest of the flock in the other world. The church and its clergy would lead the flock, including the rulers, in the earthly world, akin to shepherds. कि जो monks हैं वो तो जो lay believer है उनको गाइड करेंगे, लेकिन जो चर्च है वो किंग को गाइड करेगा. ठीक है. In effect, the priests became conduit to salvation and God, since they were the true servant of God. This is the essence of the Christian doctrine. Extra ecclesiam nala salus. All salvation is through Christ, and Christ can be reached only through the church, and therefore there is no salvation outside the church. This effectively turned Christianity into a religion of the priests, and the entirety of Christendom into the fiefdom, into the feudal structure of the church, which freed the church from the scrutiny of any form of earthly authority and secured for it overlordship over the earthly authority. तो ये जो साल्वेशन का आइडिया है, ये इनको इतना ऊपर लेके चला गया है कि ये जो अर्थली अथॉरिटी है, जो किंग है, उसके भी ऊपर बैठ गए जाके. The other less lofty objective was to secure complete proprietal ownership of the church, which was the property of the temporal ruler until the 11th century. According to D. Rover, what helped the church in making a case for its freedom from all forms of secular dominion was the fact that the separation of the spiritual and the secular was essential to Christianity itself and its understanding of human existence from the beginning. So, so how Christianity views secularism? This is the question that we started. Now, as per this Christianism or Christianity, as per Christianism, let's call it Christianism. Let's stick to that nomenclature. So, Christianism is saying कि we are eternal, our structure is eternal, and we are going to stay here till the day of judgment. But again, the king and the ruler and all these people are going to change, and we are already on top of that earthly ruling structure. So we need to separate ourselves from the earthly dominion, from the dominion of the king. We need the separation of the spiritual structure and the secular structure. And this idea is secularism. कि हम लोगों को इनके साथ एक साथ रहना ही नहीं है, बिकॉज हम तो ऑलरेडी इनके ऊपर है. Now let's separate and segregate ourselves from this, because they don't want to come under the earthly scrutiny, right? कि नॉर्मल जो एक किंगडम चलता है उसमें जितना सारा ऑडिट चलता है, जितना सारा स्क्रूटनी चलता है, जितना रिफॉर्म चलता है, as per these Christian people, they are beyond that scrutiny, and they should have stayed like that as per their opinion. Hence, they segregated themselves from the state. So, hence, quote unquote, the religion separated itself from the state. And this separation of the religion from the state, because the religion is superior as per Christianity, is secularism. So, secularism is sort of catering to secularity of the state, which means see, secularism is catering to the fact that the state is temporal. Hence, it has no right to scrutinize the Pope and the Church. Just like they are saying कि in India, all structures, it may be the court, the parliament, the provinces, CM, PM, president, no one has the right to scrutinize or audit the church and the message and the gospel that they are spreading, because they are above. They are sitting at the top of all these things. Hence, the Indian political and the state structure has no right to rule over Christianity. And that is Indian secularism. That is how these Abrahamic structures, these Abrahamic cults view secularism. To Hindus, secularism is like सरकार इसमें हस्तक्षेप नहीं करेगा, राइट, जो कि कर ही देता है. हिंदुओं के जब भी पावन कोई भी अवसर आता है तब पता नहीं पीटा लग जाता है पीछे. हाँ, दिल्ली का पॉल्यूशन आ जाता है. दिल्ली का पॉल्यूशन कम करना होगा. आई एम फ्रॉम साइंस एंड आई हैव टू से कि हाँ, दिस इज अ बिग कंसर्न. फिर अपना पता नहीं क्या क्या आ जाता है कि महिषासुर शुड बी वर्शिप्ड इंस्टेड ऑफ दुर्गा. फिर कि तुम्हारा विष्णु का जो मूर्ति अगर लगाना है तो विष्णु से जाके पूछो. दिस इज व्हाट द गवार जस्टिस, वट एवर हिज नेम इज, सेड राइट फ्रॉम सुप्रीम कोर्ट. सो ये सब जो स्ट्रक्चर है, ये हिंदुओं के लिए है. क्योंकि क्योंकि as per these Abrahamic structures, Abrahamic cults, कि हिंदू तो inferior है. So hence they should be judged by because these are kafirs, heathens, pagans, and they have the temporality of their idea. कि ये लोग तो खत्म हो जाएंगे. Second coming से पहले ये लोग खत्म हो जाएंगे. So they are temporal. Hence they Hinduism come under the state. But at no point Christianism or Islam should come under the state, come under the purview and the audit of the state by the state. तो इसलिए दिस इज द नोशन ऑफ सेक्युलरिज्म. ठीक है, ओके. So this is the idea of secularism. Then he goes on actually. Consequently, spiritual, not secular, when used in the context of contemporary nation state, must be divorced from the Christian origin, obviously, as we have explained. Now, given that the freedom enjoyed by the church translated to freedom to prevail over earthly rulers as well, it expectedly led to strained relation between Roman Catholic Church, headed by the Pope, and the earthly authorities. राइट। क्योंकि जब चर्च इतना ऊपर बैठने लगा, जो रोमन स्टेट के ऊपर, और रोमन कैथोलिक चर्च बैठने लगा, देन इट क्रिएटेड, ऑब्वियसली इट क्रिएटेड फ्रिक्शन बिटवीन द पोप एंड द किंग एंड द earthly rulers, so to say, right? फिर what made the matters worse for the church was the fact that people were willing to believe the accounts and stories of lecherous priests, and the church itself began to be seen as the biggest obstacle to the practice of true Christian faith. कि ये जो चर्च है ये हमें ट्रू क्रिश्चियन बनने से रोक रहा है. This empowered the lay believer's ability to pursue his or her own faith through individual and direct submission to God without any form of ecclesial intercession. ठीक है? This was the bedrock of the approach of the Protestant Reformation to Christianity. नाउ अगर आप यहाँ से आप जब ट्विटर में जो पोस्ट देखोगे ना आजकल, मेरे पोस्ट में तो काफी सारे, क्योंकि मैं क्रिश्चियन चीजें लिखता हूँ, ये सब कैथोलिक और प्रोटेस्टेंट चीजें आ जाता है. देन द कैथोलिक से कि क्रिश्चियनिटी इज इनकम्प्लीट विदाउट कैथोलिसिज्म, and then the picture that they post is some big Catholic church. Here they talk about that essential sort of homogeneity, कि सबको एक चर्च के तले आना है, क्योंकि वी हैव मेड द बिगेस्ट चर्च एंड ऑल, राइट, जो प्रोटेस्टेंट नहीं बना पाए. प्रोटेस्टेंट के जो चर्चेस वो कितना छोटा है, मॉडर्न, नया है, दे डोंट लुक लाइक चर्च. आवर चर्च लुक लाइक चर्च बिकॉज वी हैव द बिगेस्ट डोम, राइट. सो दिस इज कैथोलिसिज्म दैट इज गोइंग ऑन इन देयर माइंड. प्रोटेस्टेंट के दिमाग
and
में क्या
and
चलता है?
dome and dome is the Roman invention, so called. Like
हाँ
we
ठीक है,
also had domes in temples are also domes. So we are also building
एग्जैक्टली,
domes for a long, thousands of years.
राइट. और इनके दिमाग में क्या चलता है, अपना प्रोटेस्टेंट के दिमाग में, कि मेरा तो एक इंडिविजुअलिज्म है, मैं अपने तरीके से वर्शिप कर सकता हूँ. तो मैं ये कैथोलिक पोप के अंडर क्यों हूँ, राइट. इवन जो पोप पोप खुद को सबका पोप मानता है काफी टाइम, बट ये जो काफी सारे जो आपको दिख जाएगी कौन सा प्रोटेस्टेंट अखबार है जो पोप को दिखाएगा कि पोप इज द ग्रेटेस्ट ये ऑफ कैथोलिक फेथ, राइट. ऐसे जो लिखता है, द गाय हु इज राइटिंग इज दिस प्रोटेस्टेंट, राइट. बट वो जो लिखेगा कि पोप इज द ग्रेट वट एवर ग्रेटेस्ट मैन ऑफ दिस क्रिश्चियनिटी, वो कैथोलिक होगा, ठीक है. सो इस तरह से इनका चलता रहता है. सो दोज हु आर फेमिलियर विद द ओरिजिन्स ऑफ एंटी ब्राह्मण एटीट्यूड ऑफ भारत after the arrival of the European colonizer would be able to draw parallel between the Protestant Reformation's grievances with the Roman Catholic Church and the projection of similar grievances onto institutions, practices, and groups in Bharat that were seen as Brahmanical. As we shall see in the next section, the Protestant lens led the Christian European colonizer to treat Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism as reformative movement that challenged Brahmanism. क्योंकि उनके दिमाग में वो प्रोटेस्टेंट कैथोलिक का चलता रहता है, तो फिर उनके दिमाग में बुद्धिज्म, जैनिज्म और सिखिज्म एक्चुअली दे आर काइंड ऑफ प्रोटेस्टेंट मूवमेंट टू कोट अनकोट ब्राह्मणिज्म, ठीक है. इवन सो इन अदर वर्ड they colored even the history of indigenous religious development within the dharmic fold in their own image, ठीक है. um, तो ये तो आई थिंक हमने डिस्कस कर दिया व्हाट इज द सेकुलरिज्म एंड एवरीथिंग. आई वांटेड टू डिस्कस समथिंग एल्स. हाँ, सो फिर वहां से क्या आता है, वहां से तो ये लूथर, मार्टिन लूथर, इनका तो रिफॉर्म चालू होता है. बट उसके ना जब ये डिवीजन, जब रिफ्ट जब बढ़ने लगता है, तब एक तबका आता है कि ऑब्वियसली कि हमें नए तरीके से सोचना होगा. वहाँ वहाँ पे फिर क्रिश्चियन एपोलॉजिस्ट लिटरेचर बनना चालू हो जाता है. तो वहां से जब हम लोग अलग अलग जो फिलोसोफर आ रहे हैं, जिनको हम ग्रेट वेस्टर्न फिलोसोफर एंड ये सब तकमा देते हैं, जैसे जॉन लॉक हो गया, ही वाज इंग्लिश फिलोसोफर, या फिर अपना मिल्टन हो गया जिसने पैराडाइज लॉस्ट लिखा है, राइट. पैराडाइज लॉस्ट इज बेसिकली वही वहाँ पे जो जब जो सेकुलर फाइट चल रहा था बिटवीन बिटवीन द Christian, whatever Christianism anointed figure and the secular figures, वो जो टसल चल रहा था वहाँ पे, जो जिसको सेटन दिखाया गया है, वो एक्चुअली इट इज द मास मूवमेंट की जो एक सेकुलर बंदा है, ही इज एक्चुअली ट्राइंग टू टॉपल द गवर्नमेंट व्हिच इज anointed by क्रिश्चियनिज्म. वो जो फाइट है वो एक्चुअली पैराडाइज लॉस्ट है, राइट? सो इट इज सम सॉर्ट ऑफ अगेन depicting this some sort of this protest movement within England, right? जॉन लॉक जो आता है, जॉन लॉक फिर वही चालू कर देता है. जॉन लॉक एक्चुअली इज अ इंग्लिश फिलोसोफर हु कंट्रीब्यूटेड सिग्निफिकेंटली टू द डेवलपमेंट ऑफ लिबरलिज्म. तो जो मॉडर्न लिबरलिज्म जो ब्रिटिश ने हम लोगों को बेचा है एटलीस्ट, वो जॉन लॉक का लिबरलिज्म है, ठीक है? और जॉन लॉक का जो लिबरलिज्म है, इट इज बेस्ड ऑन दिस कोट अनकोट रिलीजियस टॉलरेशन, इक्वालिटी एंड द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ राइट्स. जो तीन जो हम लोग बोलते हैं, टॉलरेशन इंस्टेड ऑफ एक्सेप्टेंस, concept of rights instead of concept of duty, and the concept of let's say diversity instead of equality, right? uh, ये जो तीन डिस्टिंक्शन जो वेस्टर्न कॉन्स्ट्रक्ट और धार्मिक कॉन्स्ट्रक्ट के बीच है, ये एक्चुअली इसका जॉन लॉक का दिया हुआ है. So when the British imposed the concept of rights, concept of tolerance, and the concept of equality on us, it was the design of the John Locke. Now, what is John Locke saying, right? We have to, because he's such an important guy, we have to sort of explore the thing कि उन्होंने बोला क्या है actually, right? So here I am telling you, I'm going to say you a few things. So John Locke, right? So John Locke was fundamentally a Christian apologist who framed his political philosophy, epistemology, and moral theory as defense of the Christian truths against atheism, Catholic absolutism, and Hobbesian materialism. ठीक है? जो हॉब्स का जो materialism है, उसके खिलाफ भी ये इसने बोला था. But anyway, so about the Christian apologism, so he states explicitly in his account the reasonableness of Christianity in 1695. He is writing the Christian religion is reasonable in itself, and more so than any other. It is necessary to mankind and the greatest instrument of morality. ठीक है? He believed that the Christian revelation were true, rational, and necessary for public order. In the essay concerning human understanding, he claims that his epistemology was designed partly to protect Christianity from skepticism. So he writes, the candle that is set up in us shines bright enough for all our purposes, meaning the human mind is divinely designed to grasp through truth to justify revelation. This is apologism, right? This is apologist philosophy used as a shield for scripture. um, he also said something is along the line ki if there is no god, we have to invent a god in order to protect us. Let me quote that. हाँ, so he said कि कौन यार, John Locke said something. हाँ ना, वो वॉल्टेयर ने बोला था, बट आई विल कम टू दैट इन अ बिट. वॉल्टेयर ने कहा था कि गॉड डिड नॉट एग्जिस्ट, इट वुड बी नेसेसरी टू इन्वेंट हिम. ठीक है? सो दिस इज अ डीस्ट क्रिश्चियन मोरालिटी. बट एनीवे, सो जॉन लॉक इज सेइंग कि एडम हैज no such authority by command of God as to make him monarch over his posterity. कि एडम क्योंकि was a human being, so he is no authority to rule, right, over people without the commandment of God, right? So this is his liberalism actually. This is the modern European liberalism and the father of liberalism, who is actually defending Christianity here. ठीक है? So obviously his text that he wrote was anti-Catholic, anti-absolutist, and again it is grounded in Protestant reading of Genesis and an apology for a Christian model of political authority. ठीक है? तो वो बेसिकली जो अथॉरिटी था वो इधर से लाके अपने मतलब ऑब्वियसली अगर नेटिव को राज करना है नेटिव के ऊपर, तो कोई ना कोई राज करेगा. वो एक सेकुलर एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन होगा या वो कैथोलिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन होगा, इस पे इसका लिबरल व्यू ये था। ऐसा नहीं था कि नेटिव लोग ही राज करेंगे, नहीं, उसका व्यू था कि जो सेकुलर जो एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन है, सो कॉल्ड जो किंग वाला जो पार्ट है, वो इनके ऊपर राज कर सकता है, राइट। सो दिस
But
इज आवर
still, yeah, but still, the church will be the supreme authority, and the state cannot control church in any way.
हाँ हाँ, राइट राइट। So also in his moral theory, he basically he's saying in essay, quote unquote essay, he declares that the obligations of morality are founded on the will of God. Without God, moral rules cannot have the force of law. तो जो लॉ क्रिएट होगा वो गॉड से क्रिएट होगा, ठीक है। दिस इज क्रिश्चियन। तो अगर कोई खुद को लिबरल बोले ना, उसके मुंह पे ये फैक्ट के मारो, ठीक है। दिस इज ऑब्वियसली फुल ब्लोन क्रिश्चियन मोरल एपोलॉजिज्म। देन ऑब्वियसली he had his own theory of tolerance, right? And that is also theological, because it asserts that the magistrate must not coerce religion because only God can save souls. Toleration is required because Christ never forced belief, and the state must allow the diverse sects because true Christianity requires persuasion, not violence. कि हम लोग तो इवेंजेलिकल बनेंगे, बट वी विल कन्वर्ट थ्रू परसुएशन, नॉट थ्रू वायलेंस. The care of souls is not committed to the civil magistrate any more than to the man's care. Um, this is again a Christian argument. And then he explicitly excludes atheists from toleration. Those who are not at all to be tolerated, who deny the existence of God. ठीक है, father of modern liberalism. Uh, he also writes that faith is the assent to any proposition upon the credit of the prosper as coming from God. He then spends pages making sure this fit the framework of his empiricism, right? Basically, वहाँ से जो scientific empiricism आ रहा है, वो basically he is trying to find a Christian justification behind that, right? So this is obviously apologetic
And
maneuver. Mm-hmm.
I think uh, Professor C.K. Raju has done a very good job to actually
Right,
like find out how Christianism has infiltrated science, like so-called
right,
scientific.
right. Uh, हाँ, so this is the जॉन लॉक. और फिर यूरोप में, एक्चुअली ब्रिटेन में, आई थिंक दिस गाय वाज जॉन मिल, ठीक है। जॉन मिल का 1816 1820s, उसके बाद, सो दिस इज आई थिंक अराउंड 1700, 1695। फिर उसके बाद जो ये जॉन मिल आता है, जॉन मिल एक्चुअली ही स्टार्टेड टू गिव द आइडिया ऑफ यूटिलिटेरियनिज्म। और वहाँ पे क्या होता है, दैट वाज आल्सो सॉर्ट ऑफ अ क्रिश्चियन एपोलॉजिस्ट पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू, बिकॉज इट एक्चुअली टॉक्स अबाउट दिस कि ठीक है, एक इंडिविजुअल है, बट उसका एक यूटिलिटी है. द स्टेट शुड सॉर्ट ऑफ see the individual and the social groups as per the utility of the group. This is basically utilitarianism. Ki you don't see a man as a with his values and everything, but as a unit who could be utilized for some purpose of the state. वहां से फिर वही सोशल कैपिटल ये सब आइडिया आता है. बट देन ये मैंने जयपुर डायलॉग में रिसेंटली सुना कि 18 उस टाइम पे जब जॉन मिल का यूटिलिटेरियनिज्म आ रहा था, विच वाज एक्चुअली being enforced on the colonies to create slaves and laborers and all these things, because 1840 में आई थिंक इनका स्लेवरी बैन हुआ था. उसके पहले they were justifying slavery, and the latest apologist literature on slavery was this John Mill's utilitarianism. उसका बेटा भी कुछ जॉन स्टुअर्ट मिल या कुछ ऐसा नाम था. ही रोट अ बुक वेयर ही bashed Hinduism and all these things, right? Indian culture and everything. But so obviously इन बंदे के दिमाग में एक एंटी इंडियन कॉलोनियल मेंटेलिटी था. बस उस टाइम पे अपना कार्ल मार्क्स जो थे 1814 के 40 के अराउंड, वो लंदन में थे, राइट। तो उस हिसाब से जब इनका लिटरेचर जो सबवर्ट करना चालू किए थे ब्रिटिश ने, मैकॉले का फिर मिनट ऑफ एजुकेशन 1835 आया, कि ये तो इन्फीरियर है, ये जो हिंदू माइंड है ये इन्फीरियर माइंड है, इनको इनका पूरा लाइब्रेरी ऑफ लिटरेचर शेक्सपियर के बराबर नहीं है, तो हमें इनको अंग्रेजी सिखाना होगा। उस टाइम पे कार्ल मार्क्स वाज देयर in London. So he got all these ideas ki how whatever stagnant Hindu society is, how slavish Hindu mind is, um, and this impacted his literature. So when he's writing Communist Manifesto, if you read his criticism of Hinduism and everything, he's saying ki Hindu society is a extremely stagnant society because it cannot mass produce things and all, right. I mean, Hindu societies were like highly decentralized. It did not require any funding from the state to survive. Those were like, like, what do you call it? Symbiotic units, right, across the nation, who could survive on their own, right, because they had all these sort of functioning, right, going in a single society, in a single unit, in a
So,
single cluster, which could survive
so
without
you can
the
actually,
intervention of the state. But as per
yeah.
Karl
So
Marx,
actually,
it was actually it was a stagnant society because इनमें नेशन हस्तक्षेप नहीं कर सकते थे.
yeah, actually, Hindu society can be categorized in the ancient Hindu society as a kind of a autopilot mode, the way the planes fly now.
Right, right.
If we
But
see the auto,
as per them, it was not good enough, no, because
yeah,
they
yeah, because
need the intervention of the state directly to a human mind. बट हिंदू सोसाइटी
to be
की उसका स्ट्रक्चर ऐसा था कि स्टेट का कोई दखल करने की जरूरत ही नहीं है, और दखल करने आएगा तो दिख जाएगा कि भाई ये क्या करने आया है, राइट, विच वॉज नॉट ट्रू
state
एज पर
state
कार्ल
had
मार्क्स.
yeah, state had only three functions: economy, defense, and bit of rule of law to to make sure that the people who are not oppressed or the people are not doing much and on the others.
यू कैन डू अ
Apart
लॉट
from
ऑफ
these
थिंग इन
three,
द नेम ऑफ रूल ऑफ लॉ, वो तो छोड़ ही देते हैं अभी, ठीक है.
no, no, matlab, in the stages, because in our ancient Indian tradition, Bharatiya tradition of kings had to learn darshan, philosophy. Kings, like a king who had to know philosophy, darshan, who had to know how to fight a war. He had to, like, he would have advisors, but he would be a darshanik at core. Correct? He
राइट,
had to learn darshan. Correct?
राइट,
So in that context, the king knew how to provide nyay, what nyay actually meant. So in
राइट.
that context, people would come to Raja, मुझे न्याय करो.
हाँ, हाँ, राइट.
So who would do? Who would correct? In that context,
बट इट वॉज नॉट गुड एनफ,
The
दैट्स द
king had,
पॉइंट, इट वॉज नॉट गुड एनफ.
hmm,
इसलिए फिर वहां से फिर कार्ल मार्क्स का जो, क्योंकि क्योंकि उसने उसी ने मार्क्सिज्म लिखा, फिर ये जो एंटी एंटी हिंदू एटीट्यूड जो है वो फिर मार्क्सिज्म में भी वहां से घुस गया, ठीक है. सो दिस इज अबाउट दिस गाय. मैं और एक बंदे का नाम बोलूंगा, विच इज ऑब्वियसली अपने वॉल्टेयर का तो बोला ही है कि अगर गॉड बना भी नहीं है तो हमें बनाना पड़ेगा एक गॉड. यहाँ पे मैं बोल रहा हूँ, कोट कर रहा हूँ इससे अपना. हम्म. So this is the first discourse by Rousseau. So Rousseau is again जो फ्रेंच रिवॉल्यूशन हुआ था, जो अगेन लिबरलिज्म, क्या लिबर्टी, फ्रेटर्निटी एंड इक्वलिटी का बात होता है, आ, उसमें ये पहले चरण में आते हैं, रूसो, वॉल्टेयर एंड मॉन्टेस्क्यू, राइट. इनका लिटरेचर ह्यूजली impacted the French mob to sort of wage the French Revolution, a completely justified revolution. But the point is that ki these reformers, these so-called liberal philosophers, how they view a society, ये हम लोग अगर देखना चाहते हैं, we will find out कि these reformers were, मतलब एटलीस्ट रूसो, वॉल्टेयर, मॉन्टेस्क्यू तो एक्चुअली थोड़ा कॉम्प्लिकेटेड है, बट ये सारे एक्चुअली they were Christian apologist sort of reformer, to the extent that this guy Rousseau is writing in the book First Discourse that I need to quote the whole thing actually. Huh. So he's writing, quote, the society requires that its members adhere without question to certain religious beliefs. Again, liberal philosopher, right? These salutary certainties, quote, our dogmas or the sacred dogmas authorized by the laws are endangered by science. जो dogma है, those get endangered by science. Science is concerned with truth as such, regardless of its utility, and thus by reason of its intention is exposed to the danger of leading to useless or even harmful truth. तो उनके हिसाब से कुछ ट्रूथ्स होता है विच आर हार्मफुल और वो साइंस निकाल के लाता है इनफैक्ट जो डॉगमा के खिलाफ होता है इनफैक्ट हाउएवर द ट्रूथ इज इनएक्सेसिबल एंड देयरफॉर मतलब जो हार्मफुल ट्रूथ होता है वो काफी टाइम इनएक्सेसिबल होता है क्योंकि उन्हें डॉगमा शेड करके रखते हैं एंड देयरफॉर द क्वेस्ट फॉर ट्रूथ leads to dangerous error or to dangerous skepticism. The element of society is faith or opinion. Therefore, science or the attempt to replace opinion by knowledge necessarily endangered society. कि अगर ओपिनियन को तुम नॉलेज से रिप्लेस कर दोगे इट विल endanger society. Moreover, free society presupposes that its members have abandoned their original or natural freedom in favor of conventional freedom. That is, in favor of obedience to laws of the community or to uniform rules of conduct, to the making of which everyone can have contributed. Civil society requires conformity or the transformation of man as natural being into the citizen, but the philosopher or the scientist must follow his own genius with absolute sincerity or without any regard to the general will or the communal way of thinking. ये साइंटिस्ट फिलोसोफर है वो अपने आप ऐसे सोचते हैं जो एक्चुअली हमारे जो कम्युनल वे ऑफ थिंकिंग एंड लाइफ है उसके खिलाफ होता है और इसीलिए वो हमारा जो सेंस ऑफ राइट है उसके खिलाफ होता है ठीक है सो हाँ सो बेसिकली ही सेइंग कि परस्यूट ऑफ साइंस इज नेचुरल इनइक्वालिटी बिकॉज इट रिक्वायर्स द कल्टीवेशन ऑफ टैलेंट्स सो इसलिए बेसिकली जब हम लोग कुछ बनाते हैं जब अगर हम नॉलेज को कल्टीवेट करते हैं सोसाइटी में इट बिकम्स अ वेरी डेंजरस अफेयर so this is the liberal philosopher Rousseau. So I am quoting from page number 258. This is Natural Right and History by Leo Strauss. ठीक है so this is European liberalism. राइट ये इसलिए ये बात क्यों कर रहे हैं ये बात इसलिए कर रहे हैं क्योंकि these liberal philosophers need to मतलब create apologist literature in favor of Christianity when the time is dark, when the Christianism is being challenged. Um, so यहीं पे I think मैं आगे बढ़ सकता हूँ, but I think this is a good time to sort of end it here. हाँ, काफी सारे जो चीजें हैं लगभग मैंने डिस्कस कर ही लिया है. If anyone want to join or throw a question at us, it will be good.
I don't think a lot of people are there today. So people,
Hmm.
I think anyway tomorrow we have one more session coming up.
Hmm.
That will be bit interesting. So tomorrow join us at 3 p.m. So we are going to react to a very viral video
Hmm.
of podcast by Hyperquest and Mr. Rahul Diwan. I think.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, Mr. Rahul Diwan. So he did a podcast where we will discuss two, three pertaining points. One would be Hindu Rajya and Hindu Rashtra, and bit of lacuna in terms of Hindu society, Hindu organizations, and overall the direction of the way things are moving.
Right.
So They are a little bit complicated, but we'll try to uncover and give our perspective. So you don't have to agree with us or anybody else, but we'll give our perspective that how things look like. So we are seeing now a bit of a divergence of opinion and divergence of thoughts. The way we are moving, Bharat is moving, its economy, its polity, its culture, its organizations, its overall how things are functioning and how we see a bit of a friction growing because things are
Right.
moving forward. So when things move forward, you will have some frictions and which we have
Right.
to deal with. So tomorrow 3 p.m. we will be again we'll be coming live to discuss that part. Okay, our live reaction session on a recent podcast, and 7:30 we'll again be joining with academic man to continue our series on castes in Japan. So we're going to have some interesting discussions this weekend. So thank you, Bijinda. I think it was an interesting discussion. We had touched upon a lot of things, okay, which people don't really talk that much. So
Right.
it was a good to touch base upon them. And let's see you tomorrow at 3 p.m. And again at 7:30 for the cast. So Jai Shri Ram, Vande Mataram.
Jai Shri Ram, Vande Mataram. Good night.